Call to order the August 24th, 2015 study session of Lakewood City Council and the Lakewood Reinvestment Authority, which will follow the City Council study session immediately. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Shakti?
Here.
Murphy?
Here.
Ellen? Johnson?
Here.
Wickman? Hall? Here. Harrison?
Here.
Quinn?
Here.
Coop?
Here.
Barraway?
Here.
Roybal?
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. This is our annual budget study session, something we do every year. As we'll hear from our finance director, Larry Dorr, in a moment, budget is not something we just work on in August and September. It's a little bit like painting the Golden Gate Bridge. We work literally almost as soon as we're passing one, we're starting to do the next year's budget. So it's something that goes on all year round within the city departments here. And our efforts on City Council are also extended a little bit. We have a long, exhaustive, thorough, I should say, study session tonight, and we actually have two public hearings on our budget. So the public will have an opportunity, and Larry's going to lay out those dates, I assume. The public will have two upcoming opportunities to comment on the budget. So tonight we're going to hear from Mr. Dorr, and we're also going to hear from many members of our management team regarding their respective departments. Before we get started, I do want to recognize some citizen members of our budget and audit team that are here tonight, sitting in the audience in the front row, leaning forward with great anticipation. Donald Tallman, Tim Dennis, and John Ludwigson. Thank you very much for your work on the Budget and Audit Committee. And all three of these gentlemen have been involved in this for several years now, so we appreciate your oversight very much, so thank you. All right, with that, I will ask Larry Dorr to come forward.
Treasurer, I'm going to try to work on my microphone here. I'm sure somebody upstairs is working on it in the control room, but my green light is on.
Huh.
Give them just another second to get that going.
Yep.
Perhaps it's feeding through to...
Anything you can do, Margie? Okay.
Okay. Welcome. Once again, my name is Larry Dorr, City of Lakewood Finance Director and City Treasurer. As mentioned by the Mayor, this is our joint meeting of the Lakewood Reinvestment Authority and the City Council. Will cover both budgets tonight. As mentioned,
We're going to try to get a working mic, no? Is it too early to move for an increase in our microphone budget?
I could sit down over here if that might work.
Sure. I think a microphone is important. Yeah.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
All right. Let's just see if the slide... I think I can do this. Great. My apologies for the technical difficulties tonight. Once again, my name is Larry Dorr, City of Lakewood Finance Director and City Treasurer. Oh. I know that trick. Okay. I promise my cell phone is switched off. And third time's a charm, promise. My apologies for these technical difficulties, Mayor and Council. We'll get right down to it. And now it seems it's a bit loud, isn't it? Okay. All right. Once again, Larry Dorr, City of Lakewood Finance Director, City Treasurer. Thank you for having me tonight. This is our joint budget study session of the City Council and the Lakewood Reinvestment Authority. Of course, City Council members are commissioners and make up the board of the Lakewood Reinvestment Authority, so hence you're here. And I have on our opening slide here a picture of our 13th and Lamar roundabout. It's quite stirring, and you do see the West Metro Fire Protection District station in the background, and maybe we're going to put some puzzle pieces together tonight to include the microphone and other things, but let us do this. So in addition to the mayor's comments about this being an ongoing process throughout the year, we just use so many different forms of media to be transparent, to educate and inform the public. And we're doing that, of course, on our website. We're doing it here tonight as we record this in chambers and presenting this out on the internet. But we're also very mindful of sustainability and thinking about our consumption of resources as we do this. And so, Mayor and Council, you probably noticed that your budget document that's printed out this year is substantially thinner. Now, it's still in total online well up over 600 pages, nearly 700, but we've produced less on paper for you for a couple of reasons. The first is so that you could focus your attention on those matters that are of greatest interest and use to you as policymakers. But second, we did save over 5,000 sheets of paper in the process, or the amount of paper that would ordinarily fill this case right here. And that amounts to color printing, labor, bindery, and other costs, over $500. Now those items, those materials, that information is still available online. You can access that here during tonight's session. I wrote about that in the memo to you regarding this budget document. And all of our department heads who are here will be able to address any of that content and speak to any of the activities happening within the various departments and so forth. So the information is still there, but we're presenting it in a more compact way for you as policymakers, and also conserving money and natural resources along the way. It's somewhat connected to our initiatives as a finance department as well. This year, this winter, we will not be printing on paper all of the sales tax return forms that we ordinarily would. We're going to save 52,000 sheets of paper doing that, and 26,000 envelopes, and $13,000 in paper, postage, and other costs. So we've really kind of put our money where our mouth is in terms of saving resources and money. Now I've placed back here the slide advancer. Let me grab that. Okay. As mentioned earlier by the mayor, we do have a budget and audit committee, and they do meet quarterly, and they're reviewing what we also put online, and that's our income and expense statement for the general fund. But they've also met just earlier tonight with the city's external financial statement auditor. That's an independent CPA that audits the books and records of the city's finances. And then she and her team present a report to this committee, and they're able to ask independent questions and hear how the audit went, any areas for concern, areas of interest, areas of opportunity. And I'd like to invite the three members of the Budget and Audit Committee to come forward and introduce themselves and describe their years of service and then also their professional backgrounds so that you can get a little flavor for the diversity. So gentlemen, would you come forward to the podium and introduce yourselves briefly? Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, my name is John Ludwigson. As Larry mentioned, I've been on the Budget and Audit Committee for some time. I believe Larry told me just back there that I've been on for 9 years, which I think is the entirety of the existence of a citizen member on the Budget and Audit Committee. Seems like I probably should have been fired at some point along the way, but apparently not quite yet. It's been a great opportunity to serve. I think the Audit Committee has been a tremendous unique experience from what I can tell in terms of giving the citizens an opportunity to review and have some input into the process. My background is I've worked at the United States Government Accountability Office. I'm an assistant director there, so the GAO is one of the government's auditing entities, so it's, I think, aligned with the purpose of the Budget and Audit Committee.
Thanks, John.
Mr. Mayor and City Council, my name is Donald Tallman, and I'm the Executive Director of the Colorado Railroad Museum in Golden, and a longtime city resident here. I've been on the Budget and Audit Committee for 7 years now, and I have really enjoyed the opportunity to work with City Council and to be part of that budget process. Thank you.
Thanks, Donald.
Mr. Mayor, Council, my name's Tim Dennis. I've been on the Budget and Audit Committee 6 years, so I'm the newbie. And I'm still learning from these gentlemen and council. It's a fascinating process. I really enjoy it. My mother has run a small business in Lakewood for almost 40 years. First over at 16th and Allison, and now we're over at the Colfax Kipling Shopping Center. So it's, from a small business standpoint, it really is a fascinating process as well.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you, gentlemen. And it really speaks to the diversity of the committee when you recognize that you have small business and the private sector, the not-for-profit sector, and then government as well involved in this committee. I mean, I can't think of a better balance. And then it also should be mentioned that council members Coop, Kellen, and Johnson also serve on the Budget and Audit Committee. They're tasked with doing a number of things, but one of the things they'll do is preview our budget estimates and forecasts to ensure that they're reasonable. You know, we put in a lot of effort to make up the forecasts and put forth a right and proper budget, but it's great to have that oversight and independent input from folks from different walks of life and can bring those perspectives to us. So tonight I have 5 co-presenters that will join me at the microphone, and we'll cover 2014 activities. I'll bring you up to speed on those. Financial activities year to date through July. We haven't quite closed the books on August. And then we'll do some projections and show you the 2016 budget. We'll update you on programming items, things that will be changing and adding in this budget. We'll give you an update on capital projects already in process and an update on capital projects that will be coming down the road. And then we'll have a period of questions and answers. Of course, I'll also run you through the usual compliance. We want to make sure we're in compliance with state law, charter, and all of those kinds of things. And then have a session for questions and answers. You know, one thing that I should note, this is our calendar of activities thus far to date, and Mayor, I'll provide the next steps here as soon as I hit the button. But one thing that should be noted here that I often point to is that this study session is not required. This is City Council really engaged in the budget process and going deep into some of the details and estimates for the future. So this study session is not a requirement, but it's an election of mayor and council, and I think that speaks volume for your engagement in these things. September 14th, we'll have a public hearing. I'll make a smaller presentation to sort of give the public who would be viewing for the first time an overview of the budget. And then on October 5th, we'll have that second hearing. Again, the public will have an opportunity to come to the microphone and provide feedback, question any of the estimates, things like that. And then council will have a vote on the adoption of the 2016 budget. One of the first things that we do as we start thinking about the income of the city, and that's really the first leg of the budget process, is to really sort of look out and understand what's happening in the general economy, global economy, national, and of course the regional. And everybody's been reading headlines like this recently. Our unemployment in Colorado is just a touch over 4%. That's very, very low. It was over 8%, nearly 9% in 2011. So unemployment is very low. You can read here that we're adding 61,000 jobs and so forth. This article is very recent. And then everybody is feeling, and you'll hear in our budget process, what's happening with real estate values in our state. And folks who own property understand what's happening there. However, we certainly have felt stock market instability in these last few days. In fact, I prepared my first draft of these slides about a month ago, and my first bullet point was stock market, 18,000. And on July 20th, it was 18,200. And then I prepared a draft of the presentation for the city manager, and I changed that to stock market, now 17,000. And then this morning, I just changed that to instability because we're now at 15,800, and if you didn't know that, you do now. And that's a 12% drop in just as little as 40-some days, or less than that. So quite a dramatic change. And that will, those words will be relevant to my discussion later in the presentation about our volatility, frankly, in collecting sales taxes and using those revenues to provide municipal services and capital projects. So let us keep this stock market instability in mind, as it also impacts interest rates. Now, I still say that they're stable, as you see here. But these are some of the external things that we should all consider as we think about revenue and expenditure forecasts for the city for this 2016 budget. One other thing I wanted to update you on that's a little closer to home, that's regarding the sales tax on internet goods. You recall we've been dealing with this for 15 years as a city in terms of folks who are purchasing from Amazon and Overstock.com, those kinds of folks. They don't pay sales taxes, and that's impacted the revenues to the city and then therefore the services that we can provide. So let me give you an update on that. It once was referred to as the Marketplace Fairness Act. It was actually passed by the United States Senate and sent to the House of Representatives, where it was renamed, and they've hence renamed it again, the Remote Transactions Parity Act. And let's see where that goes. But it's fairly comparable to what was seen in the past. So I'll continue to track this. I don't want to look back on how many budget study sessions I've brought this up. Might be a little depressing for us all. Most of my presentation will surround activities in the city's general fund for a couple of reasons. One, the general fund is more than twice as large as all of the other activities, all of the other funds combined. So it's quite large. Also, it's the area, the word general speaks to this, where funds can be spent on any lawful municipal purpose. Other special revenues or fiduciary funds, monies of that sort that are organized separately, they can only be used for that purpose. So hence we spend the majority of our time here. And Mr. Mayor, if you'd indulge me perhaps at the end of my presentation, I don't have any slides to this effect, but we do have some variances in the funds other than the general fund that I'd like to address, sir, that I think will answer some questions that I anticipate about some business changes that we're making as an organization that should have stood out, likely, as you were looking through your budget document. So, Mr. Mayor, once I've had a seat back here, if we could do that, that'd be great. Yep. So I start with the income because we can control our expenses as a city, but we can't control our income. And so we want to take a real hard look at that. And this is what happened last year. We kind of look at last year, figure out what's happening this year to date, and then project forward. So last year, we've closed our books. We've gone over the audit. I mentioned the auditor earlier. And I've added a line here that's something I haven't presented in the past when I've shown historical financials, and that's the Tabor refund. That's an offset to revenue. So I've got gross minus the Tabor refund for 2014, and then the net. We did have management accomplish savings in expenditures right on 6%, and that's really a tremendous output. And I want to thank my colleagues for their hard work behind me for working toward those savings. And then we did transfer reserves 2014. Now, when the 2014 budget was drawn up 2 years ago, in summer of 13, we did plan for that last transfer for the Civic Center Plaza funding. And of course, we carried that out in both the revised audit, or the revised budget, and then of course the 2014 audit. And then you see our bottom line. So we would take those revenues and then ask, how are things going to date, and build off of that. A few more highlights from last year, because you might be curious. We were quite a bit over budget in revenue. That's favorable. And we had quite an increase from prior year. Sales tax revenues, 3.9%. Or excuse me, 3.9 million, 7.3%. This speaks to that economic volatility that I touched on a moment ago. Most of our sales tax is derived on discretionary consumer spending, and that, of course, is driven by consumer confidence, and much of that is driven off of the stock market, value of real estate, and so forth. So obviously consumers felt really good last year and made quite a bit, many more purchases. Building tax, and I've got some highlights for this later on in my presentation. You'll recognize these projects, but building material taxes and permits really made up a very substantial portion of the revenue. And if I may say, we were over budget about 5% in revenues. Most of that was late in the year, so it was a real increase in revenues. So overall, 8.1%. That's very unusual. I haven't seen revenue growth of that in my career, and I don't anticipate we'll see that at any time in the future. We were at a real peak, I think, in the business cycle in 2014. In Lakewood. However, those revenues, and we've got to really work on our communication of this, and I'm relying on Mr. Reeder, our reporter here tonight, to really help the public understand this, in that while those revenues are collected, we are limited by the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights, and that's that word up there, TABOR. I use that often, so I forget to recall that it's the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights, which is a Colorado constitutional amendment. That amendment limits revenues to 3.501%, and hence the refund $5,200,119. Forgive me, I'm typically not this precise with percentages and dollar amounts, but I felt that was important to demonstrate that these are not abstract, they're very concrete numbers, they've been audited, we will proceed with these. And then another thing that we'll be doing in this year's budget is we will be forecasting TABOR refunds and budgeting for them as well. A little bit different, and I'll go through my methodology for those forecasts, and I think you'll find some real nuances to that I hope will shed some light on things. So again, sales and use tax, as I mentioned, you see here that it's 2/3 of our general fund. It's the thing that really drives our revenues, and it is the most volatile. In 2009, sales tax revenues dropped 9%. You saw earlier, up 7%. I'll show you what they're doing year to date here in just a minute. But that's the makeup. And let me walk through these for those in the audience who may not be familiar. So sales and use tax, we've got that. Charges, those are charges for services, be it recreation centers, court costs, things like that. Property tax, everybody understands. Franchise fees, those are private companies utilizing governmental resources, and they pay a portion of their revenue for that. Intergovernmental revenues, we do receive the Highway Users Trust Fund monies from the state, so we get money from other governments. And then the one other that you should be skeptical of, anytime you see that, I try to explain a little bit. So it would be things like business and occupations tax, tobacco tax, interest income, things like that, but nothing that makes up more than 2% in that category. And of course, all of the details down to the nth degree are in the document online. So first step in the budget process, look back. How'd things go? How'd things go last year? And then let's use our own intelligence of what we know happening within our borders to drive what we might forecast in revenue. And if you look around Lakewood, you see a lot's happening. This is a shot of the Hyatt Hotel that's being constructed across the street at Belmar. And of course, you can imagine the building permit, plan check fees, and so forth, the construction use tax that's derived from this project. We saw that in our 2014 revenues. But this will drive jobs, and all of those hotel room stays will be subject to sales tax. So that will be driving our revenues and something for us to think about. This is a project, a shot that I showed a year ago at the budget study session. This is the First Bank Corporation headquarters. A year ago, they were constructing their multi-level parking garage. Here it is today. It's done. It's ready for their additional multi-hundred employees who will be coming to work in this office building. This is a recent shot that demonstrates their construction in progress. And you might ask, what does all of this mean to sales taxes? Well, again, I mentioned building material use taxes, permit fees, inspection costs, etc. But what this really means is that businesses think that they can make money investing in the Lakewood economy. And that speaks volumes for the fact that we have a safe community with a quality living environment and good schools and the right mix of things where businesses and their workers want to be here. This is a near $40 million project. And this is a very astute business that has a lot of experience, and they don't make these investments without lots of thought and consideration, and of course approval of their board of directors. And this isn't just but the start of some of the projects that you'll see. A year ago, I showed you this project. Love to see the bulldozers. You know how I feel about those. They're terrific. Always try to capture them on film. And this project is over at Belmar. It's now complete. Once again, construction taxes, all the construction jobs, and an apartment complex that is finished. I showed this project out on Union Boulevard. This is the West Terra. Only thing I like better than bulldozers are cranes. See that there. And it's now done. And of course, again, driving jobs, driving tax revenue is something that we need to be aware of. Here's another job going on West Colfax, on the north side of Colfax. In fact, this is 268 units of apartments. It's so large, you really can't capture the essence of the project without multiple shots. So here's the same project from a different vantage point. Love to see the sheetrock there. Great stuff. And the workers. And then another shot of this project. So again, think of the revenues that are coming in. However, you should pause and realize that these projects don't happen all of the time, right? These are one-time infusions of revenue. So we'd want to think very carefully before adding permanent long-term programming against that. That's something to be cautious of. This is the Zephyr Line project at 13th and Wadsworth, or excuse me, 13th and Zephyr, crying out loud. And this was a project that you might recall. These are apartments. This is a project you might recall where Lakewood City Council collaborated with Jefferson County Commissioners to use private activity bonds for the investment in these apartments. And here you have it. The project's getting done. Apartment complex just north of Union here at Van Gordon. Again, you see the construction materials. We do have some retail going on, not just multifamily housing, but this is the Sprouts, essentially at First and Wadsworth. It'll be open in January. You know I'm going to say concrete pump, right? I love to see those. It's just great, and the workers that come with it. So we welcome Sprouts to the community in the coming year. Now, we don't tax groceries as a community, and nor does Denver or Aurora, it should be noted. So those sort of stable areas of consumer purchases we don't have. We have the more volatile clothing, gifts, other things that we tax, and those are much more volatile in terms of consumer sentiment and behavior. So I just want to point that out as we go along. The Qdoba Corporation brought its headquarters to Belmar. That's terrific. Again, companies that feel that they can make money and attract good workers, they're moving to our community. And if that weren't enough, Qdoba's opening a store that's under construction. We have other sectors of the economy. This is Colorado Christian University. You see the bulldozers, and great to see the construction happening here on West Alameda. And then a year ago, I showed this picture of the Tarumo BCT project. And the picture I'll show in a minute is the current one, but just know that the steel you see here, we do tax, but it's also presented from just half of the building, and that's the whole building. And just look at the cars in the parking lot, right? You can tell that a company is feeling bullish about doing business in Lakewood. Lakewood is open for business, and it's tremendous, and it's just as visible as driving around the community. And I think I covered nearly all four corners of the community and all of the wards. So that's just terrific. And you notice that the jobs are such a mix. Now, this office building isn't going to develop ordinary sales and use tax for our monthly budget to provide for the streets and the parks and the police that we need to keep things going. So we need to be thoughtful about that as we go through the process. So first, we kind of have an awareness of what's going on nationally. We look at what's going on in our own backyard. And then we look at what professional economists are forecasting for the future. Now, I have two sets of numbers here, and I think they're equally important. First of all, this is the governor's Office of Planning and Budgeting. These are professional economists with PhDs. This is all they do, is forecast, do these economic outlook forecasts. So this is the most recent one from June. Governor's Office forecasting the state's sales tax revenues. They also forecast the consumer price index, which is the two CPI numbers to the right. Now, interestingly, Tabor revenue limits are derived off of the consumer price index. So you should right away be thinking, we're going to forecast a sales and use tax revenue based on something near the first two numbers. And then we're going to forecast a Tabor limit, something like the two numbers on the right. Now, right off, you should be thinking, feels like another Tabor limitation, another Tabor refund. And I'll get to the details of that here in a minute. But in terms of deriving our forecast for Tabor refunds, we've looked at just these two things. Now, the governor is not the only one in this business, but also the state legislature. They have their legislative council. Also, they are professional economists with PhDs. And you'll notice they released their report on the exact same day. And 2016-17, they're nearly identical, but for this year, a little bit different, especially when the state is, upwards of $1 billion in sales tax revenue. So it's quite a big difference. So again, we kind of took the midpoint for the Tabor forecast between the two CPI numbers, and you'll see that here in a minute. So what's going on this year? This year to date, and I should say these are the numbers through July. And we do post every quarter, and we've got the June year to date out on lakewood.org, the income and expenses for the general fund. And you can track these numbers. We put the 2014 right next to the 2015, and you can really go to town looking at these. But 2015 was a record year for vehicle sales in Lakewood. We are, again, 12% ahead of that. I don't know how sustainable that is. I should also say, you should notice, purchasing a new vehicle typically is somewhat discretionary. I mean, certainly there are those instances when the car is, involved in a crash or it just completely stops working. Most people go out and buy a new vehicle. But the other 90% of the time, people think, they plan, they might buy a new vehicle this year, they might buy it next year. So this is a substantial portion. This is nearly 5% of the general fund revenue, motor vehicle revenues. And so we watch what's going on with car sales very, very carefully. And I think and I'll repeat for the public, the sales tax on vehicles or motor vehicle use tax is derived based on where you live. So if our residents are going off to other parts of the state or the country and buying a vehicle, they bring it here, they pay the use tax. And then you see these two in yellow that are down. Licenses and permits, and primarily that category is building permits, and then, of course, building material use tax. We're still at a level higher than 2013, but we are not at the level of 2014 because those projects that you saw are just once-in-a-decade type projects. They just all happen to have occurred within a short period of time. So total revenues only just slightly decreased because those two are really balancing each other out. And then year-to-date increased to 2.3% in expenditures. And generally speaking, that's right on plan, substantially because we can control those. So here are our estimates. Sales taxes, 2.9% for the rest of the year. Even though we're a tad higher than that, we want to have some conservatism in there. We looked at next year, 4%. Property taxes, this 2015 number is right on what we're tracking this year. But you've had your properties reassessed. We all have, I should say. And we'll be paying higher property tax bills next year as a result. We've forecasted 7.5%. I'm having residents tell me that their residential properties are being reassessed 10, 12, 15% higher. Of course, it just depends, like so many other things. And then the commercial properties, which, by the way, make up half of our revenue, that tends to vary based on the scale of office, light industrial, retail, all of those different things. That's a real mix. Now, you might wonder, well, Larry, I've had my property's been reassessed. I've got the letter in the mail. I know what's going on. How come you don't know what the property tax will increase by? And the assessor's office hasn't yet consolidated all those and sent us the data. We'll get that in the middle of November, but we've got to adopt a budget no later than November 1st, according to city charter. So we're in a little bit of a conundrum there. You see what we're forecasting in motor vehicle taxes and total revenue. And then Tabor limit forecast. And this is a first for me. We can't know what our 2015 limit will be because it's based on the local growth element, again, provided by the county. And then the 2016 limit, we use the 2015 2015 CPI, we're still in the middle of 2015. So there you go in terms of income, our forecast, the variables that go in, and what we're thinking and feeling in the budget office. Other side of the ledger now, expenditures. And of course, Mayor and Council, you know this, you've been doing this and you understand what Lakewood provides to the public, and that is services. We don't have any patents. We don't have inventory like a private company. We don't have work in process. No, we provide services with people. And so personnel, 74% of our spending. And nearly all of the services and supplies that we spend money on are to provide tools, equipment, natural resources, what have you, to the people. So an example that's clear is we have police officers out in their squad cars. They need gasoline, they need tires, they need radio equipment, obviously, and all of those other things, and that's the services and supplies. And then in our operating fund, we have a very small amount set aside for capital. So what are some of the new expenses? I have 4 co-presenters who will come up in a moment and talk about that. First will be our Chief Information Officer, Mark Prey. He'll talk about Microsoft Office 365. Chief Kevin Paletta will come up after Mr. Prey. And Chief Paletta will talk a little bit about police staffing and some work that he's doing there. These are big numbers, for sure. And then our Public Works Director, Mr. Jay Hutchison, will come up and talk a little bit about programming happening within Public Works related to building plan review. And as I described earlier, we have all of these projects going on, and they flex from year to year. And Mr. Hutchison is proposing in this budget some changes there to address that volume and demand. And then Mr. Hutchison will switch gears, and he'll start talking a little bit about some of the capital project spending that's going on in this budget. And then he will have our Director of Community Resources, Kit Newland, come up and talk about some of the capital projects completed, in process, and coming within the Community Resources Department. Okay? So a little bit more data on that coming down the road. So here's our 2016 budget, all stitched together with all of the different numbers. And let me just walk through a couple of things in the revised. First, you notice in our original 15 budget, we don't have a Tabor refund forecast. We do now in our revised. Expenditures really not changing too much. You shouldn't be surprised by that. We did a year ago, Council approved $2 million in a supplemental sidewalk program. Mr. Hutchison will describe some of the work that's gone on in that. Those funds were transferred and appropriated here since January 1st of 2015. So he'll update you on that. And of course, that's going to remain in the revised. And then in 2016, you do see an increase in spending of over $5 million. And again, my compatriots will come up and address some of the programming issues. And of course, we are forecasting an increasing cost in compensation and benefits for our workers necessary to remain competitive as an employer. And you see the bottom line. I took a shot here at putting all of those things for for a 5-year period on this grid for a couple reasons. One, you could see what's happening with revenue, but in the area of expenses, while we do have these savings, and I know that council and the public are aware of those, we are still spending more. It is costing more to provide services to the public. You see what's happening with reserves, and then I've also got a column here on the Tabor refund, or Taxpayers' Bill of Rights refund. And I want to do a little work on more detail of that now, as it seems an area of interest. And then I'll hand it over to my colleague, Mark Prey. So one of the things that is interesting about Tabor is that conceptually, the idea is that governmental revenues, and therefore governmental spending, will be limited by inflation. And that's, I think, most people's understanding of the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights. But there's a little twist. Each year, that base and increment, or the amount of allowed growth, is reset. So these are actual numbers. In 2012, the city's allowed revenue under Tabor was $81.7 million. Now, right away, I know, Mayor and Council, you instantly thought, wait a minute, our general fund is $110 million. Where'd the rest of the money go, Mr. Dorr? No. Some of the general fund's revenues are exempt from Tabor, such as the voters exempted the revenues by vote in 2005 for the sales and use tax that was voted on at 1%. Also, in the 1990s, the voters elected to exempt all of the revenues from the Denver West annexations. So those revenues are sort of out of the box. But you have to add in the Economic Development Fund, Capital Improvement Fund, and other funds, and all of that mixed together comes to this $81.7 million, okay? So we were limited 2012. So 2013, we're allowed growth, but we're not allowed growth on the existing year's limit. We're allowed growth on the existing year's collections. That's somewhat a permanent reduction, okay, from one year to the next. Lots of people use a different expression for that, but I just want to call it sort of a reset or a permanent reduction. These are actual numbers. The next year, from 2012 to 2013, the actual revenues went from 79.5 to 82.8, okay, or an increase of 4.2%. However, the Tabor revenue limit for 13 was only 2.6%, or 81.6. So interestingly, you see the limit went down from one year to the next. So the growth is only allowed on what was actually collected, not the prior year's limit, okay? Now what's interesting is if you'd have taken 81.7 million and added the 2.6% to it, it would have been about 82.8. It wouldn't have been any refund. But each year there's that permanent reduction. So you recall in 2013, we had a $1.2 million refund. And we carried that out. Here's the number for 2014. Again, we don't use the increased limit, but again, that permanent reduction. So we were allowed 3.5. I showed that earlier. We grew 8.2. That's 5.2 million. I think you're tracking this now. So this, however, I think in 2015 is when it really gets interesting to me. And that is, we believe that actual revenues will only grow by 0.3%, right? Because we are going to have decreasing building activities, although strong, decreasing. Increases in sales tax, so basically flat revenues or thereabouts on the Tabor. However, the limit allows 3.3%, but it doesn't matter because we have that permanent reduction. So hence we're forecasting $2.7 million in Tabor refund. So now you'd be able to point to an exact example where actual revenues grow by an amount less than allowed by Tabor, but there's still a refund because of that permanent reduction, okay? So the only way that this gets corrected is a recession. That's really it. Actual revenue is just going to have to go down. And then here's our 2016 forecast. And now this is sort of the other end of it. Actual revenues growing at about the Tabor limit, 2.8, 2.7, but still we're going to have $2.8 million in refund. Now here's another interesting thing. If you had taken the 81.7 in 2012 and just allowed that limit to grow without the permanent reduction, it would be about $92 million. So yet the idea is that governmental revenues are not allowed to grow by inflation. They're allowed to grow what was actually collected in a prior year if it's less. What that means to Lakewood is $11.9 million. And just to put that into context, we could resurface 80 miles of streets with that. I mean, I don't even know how many park benches that would add up to, but I think that has to be real and tangible. And of course, I'll be available to answer questions. I know that it took me a long time to conceive of that slide, much less to put it together, and I'm sure it was a lot to digest. So I'd welcome any questions of that. So that concludes my initial presentation. I'll have a few more slides for you in a moment, but I'm giving a moment for my colleague, Chief Information Officer of the City of Lakewood, Mark Prey, to come down to the podium, and he'll talk a little bit about Lakewood information technology. Mr. Prey?
Thank you. Mayor, members of council, I'll talk a little bit about our strategy from a very high level, and then I'd like to talk about a new program that we're implementing about IT governance, and then I'll talk briefly about Microsoft Office 365. So, oops, oh boy. Okay, so from an IT perspective, our strategy is to realize that Lakewood is full of possibilities, and it's our responsibility to explore the full extent to which technology can help the city of Lakewood achieve its full potential for every resident, visitor, and business. Our core objectives and actions include establishing an open and transparent forum to explore new possibilities, to develop a process, to set clear priorities so that we deliver as much value as possible while living within our means. And then finally, by reestablishing trust, by delivering on our commitments and anticipating the needs of our residents, visitors, and businesses by becoming trusted business advisors to all city departments and employees. That's pretty good, significant change. So I'll talk briefly about IT governance, what it is and how it works. So IT governance is the process of reviewing and priority technology investment priorities by a select team of city executives. Some of the benefits of a governance program are that it will reduce the squeaky wheel syndrome. In my experience, without governance, good department heads that are squeaky wheels, their projects get funded over some other projects that may be more deserving. And so it level sets the playing field from a citywide perspective. It improves economies of scale by reducing overall costs. We can combine requests into a single system, for instance, and it allows us to deploy fewer larger systems. Governance is also very strategic. It allows us to set a strategy, a more coherent strategy, and it's more comprehensive. The way it works is it's a two-step process. Opportunities are collected by IT from the rest of the department or rest of the departments, and they're analyzed in a two-step process. The first gate includes a high-level analysis focused on business outcomes so that side-by-side comparison to other opportunities is possible. If it's initially accepted through that first gate, a more thorough analysis that might result in a request for information or even an RFP, it'll provide more accurate estimates on resource and budget requirements. If a project makes that gate, then it's queued for approval in the formal budget process. So we're real excited to get that going. It should happen shortly. So the team, as it sits today, is comprised of myself. Again, I'll be the staff member for this team. The city manager, obviously, that's a citywide perspective, and you can see that the deputy city manager is included in this team. The director of finance, it's really essentially the budget group plus IT to kind of review our technology investments. It allows us to have a high-level citywide perspective. That's the team. And so what is the impact on governance to the 2016 budget? First of all, we have many more opportunities than we can both fund and or staff. We have started the analysis of those opportunities. We hope to have 2 to 3 meetings for the rest of this year. We have collected the budget requests from all the departments in their 2016 budget requests and moved them into the more comprehensive IT governance process so that they get that citywide perspective. So our intent is to go through those opportunities, prioritize those, see what we can fund and staff, and then we would like to check back with council when we're complete with that. That's a one-time thing as we implement this new program. Next year, we expect the IT governance process will just mirror the council calendar, the budget calendar. So by budget time next year from now, we would know what we plan to fund. And then I would like to, before I go to my end slide, talk briefly about Office 365. That's a change in how we acquire software a little bit. I guess I'll reference the sales tax system the city has. It's an industry-leading system. It's cloud-based. It's provided by external service providers. That reduces the need for Lakewood to staff up, both to support that, and it reduces the need for us to buy equipment to do that. I'd like to tell a little story about Chief Pauletta's regionalization efforts with the police records system. The initial estimate to buy the servers and the disk storage for that system, for that effort was about $370,000. By exploring a cloud-based solution for that infrastructure, we're able to reduce that cost to $50,000 a year as a subscription. So if you go back, the old way, it was $370,000 initial investment, followed by annual support, which would be about $50,000 to $60,000 to $70,000. And then after 5 years, that equipment would be too old and you'd have to replace it. So we've saved a significant amount of capital investment by going to the cloud. It's not a done deal, but that's just a good story about why cloud is good. So that, Microsoft Office 365 will allow the City of Lakewood to stay current. We'll no longer have to use city staff to update those programs. It'll also provide the full stack of Microsoft Office. There are certain elements we don't use here yet that we could take advantage of, such as OneNote, Lync, which is Skype for Business, things like that. So I'm really excited about that. It helps us as well with email retention compliance, other things that we're trying to accomplish. So with that, I'll introduce my colleague, Police Chief Kevin Paletta. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Mark. Mayor, City Council, Kevin Paletta, Lakewood Police Chief. I will be talking about the portion of the budget that relates to the police staffing request for 2016. Give you a little background on why this request is in the budget and a little context for it. First, it's important to understand that we are required through the Commission on Accreditation through law enforcement agencies to conduct periodic workload assessments of our personnel throughout the police department. We typically conduct these every 3 to 5 years. It's also a good business practice to conduct those workload assessments because things change relatively quickly, as we've seen both in a technology standpoint and in a budget standpoint. The last workload assessment or staffing analysis that we conducted was conducted in 2011 by a gentleman by the name of Dr. Tim Friesmeier. His company is Etico Solutions, and he conducted an assessment of our current workload and patrol agent staffing. He did not look at investigations. And what Dr. Friesmeier concluded in 2011 with regard to our staffing was that the patrol division within the police department was adequately staffed but inefficiently deployed. We were working 3 sets of 10-hour shifts at that time. He estimated we had an efficiency factor using those shifts of about a 50, and that if we would consider transitioning to a 12-hour shift, that we could improve our efficiency factor from a 50 up to an 84. We did begin a deployment of that. We did a pilot project in 2012 of that model, the 12-hour shift model. It was met with mixed reviews from our police employees, and probably one of the most noteworthy outcomes from that was the fatigue factor, particularly for those individuals that were working the night shift. It's important to also note that at the end of 2012, we had the tragic loss of Officer James Davies, and one of the findings from the independent review panel was that fatigue was a factor in that tragedy. So we abandoned the 12-hour shift at the end of 2012, and we returned back to a 10-hour shift. But we had 5 different shift start times. So we enhanced our efficiency by going from 3 start times to 5 different start times. And our efficiency factor went from a 50 to about a 74 at that time. Now, there have been changes since 2011, hence the necessity for a new workload assessment. There have been changes within the police department and clearly changes within the city. We've added a commander to the patrol division within the police department. We added a training agent to keep track of training records and to provide adequate training, not only in-service training, but recruit training for our patrol agents. And we detached an agent to the Metro Gang Task Force. That was in response to concerns about gang activity throughout the metro area. There have been significant changes that have occurred in the city since 2011, including St. Anthony Hospital opening, light rail opening, population increases as projected by the U.S. Census of roughly 5%. Call load and workload increases in the police department since 2011 of about 9%. So all of those necessitated a new staffing analysis and study. Study methodology looks at number of agents that you have to deploy. It looks at the workload, the call load, the time of day that calls are received, the amount of time that is spent on the call, and the schedules that you use to deploy your personnel. Maybe one of the most important takeaways from the staffing study, and it's a question that I receive on a regular basis, and that is, this is about service, not about safety. This is a quote from the staffing study that was conducted in 2015 by the International Association of Chiefs of Police. And what they said is, while the department is meeting service demands, in other words, calls for service, augmentation is needed in order to achieve IACP standards for agencies with a community policing focus. I think the important piece of this, and maybe the best way to explain it, is by talking about a shift. When a police agent works a 10-hour shift, 30% of their time, or roughly 3 hours, are spent on administrative duties. That includes roll call, that includes meals, that includes report writing, that includes loading the patrol car, that includes unloading the patrol car, and it even includes dressing and undressing in a police uniform. 3 hours of the shift is dedicated to administrative duties. With our current workload, our current call load, and the increases that we have seen since 2011, about 3.5 to 4 hours of a 10-hour shift is actually spent committed on calls for service. That is taking a police report, that is handling an investigation, that is taking a traffic accident report, that is conducting a traffic stop. That leaves roughly 3 to 3.5 hours of a 10-hour shift for uncommitted or proactive activities. That can be used for directed enforcement, that can be used to address traffic problems in neighborhoods, crime problems in different parts of our community. It can be used to attend community meetings and interact with the public. What the IACP standard for a community policing agency is 40% uncommitted time, not 30 to 35%, which we currently have. So when I say this is not about safety, it's about service. It's about trying to get our uncommitted time from where it's at now to a level that IACP recommends so that we will have more time to devote to community service types of activities. Again, if I were to put it in further perspective, in order for our safety to be impacted, we would probably, and by safety I mean citizen safety, officer safety, we would probably have to lose somewhere in the neighborhood of about 25% of our workforce before I would be before the city manager and before council saying safety is now being impacted by our staffing level. That's not what this study's about. A couple other takeaways from the study. The study says that they further recommend that the PD take a measured approach to increasing staffing, which we have done with the 2016 budget, and that most law enforcement agencies, such a large increase in staffing is neither feasible nor affordable. So what did the study recommend, and what are we moving forward with? Well, first of all, the study recommends, and we are requesting, an increase in 8 agents and 2 community service officers for the 2016 budget. 4 of those agents would start in January and 4 would start in the July Police Academy. Community service officers are non-sworn positions. You may be familiar with these. They're uniformed personnel, but they don't carry a badge and a gun, and they handle some of the less dangerous activities of a police agent. These include crime scene processing work, vehicle impounds, and the collection of minor police reports. They are about a 25% savings over a cost of a police agent. The study goes on to recommend that we look and seek for improvements in patrol and investigation scheduling efficiencies. As I alluded earlier, we were able to improve our efficiencies from 2011 from about an efficient factor of 50 to 74. We are now looking at a schedule for 2016 that has an efficiency factor of roughly 80. So we're able to increase it, not as efficient as a 12-hour schedule, but we're getting close. The study also asks recommends that we take a look at an analysis of agent injury leave, as we have seen a significant increase in the amount of leave time that agents have taken as a result of injuries. The study recommends that we conduct an analysis on realigning our beat boundaries. This is interesting because in 2011, the recommendation was that we look at workload and call load in the beats and that we realign the beats based on the workload and call load of 2011. We did that at the time. Workload and call load has shifted, so the recommendation is that we continue to look at realigning those for efficiencies. In other words, we want agents in the vicinity of where the calls for service are received and not having to drive long distances for those. The study recommends that we take a look on the impact the Regional Training Academy has had on staffing. The Regional Training Academy operates from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday, and many times we have to detach personnel to assist with the training during those hours. It's a very concentrated window, but it does pull from patrol staffing, so we are looking at the impact the Regional Training Academy has on staffing. Also, we want to reevaluate staffing and service levels in 2016. In other words, this is not a one-solution approach. We want to take a look at all the various solutions that are recommended by the study, assess what impact that has had on our staffing levels and our service levels, and then come back to the City Council to consider if a need for further staffing is needed. So what happens as a result of these changes and recommendations? First of all, we expect to see improved efficiencies and staffing levels in the following areas. In the patrol division, we're going to be seeing a greater availability of officers to handle calls for service, both through more efficient scheduling and through an increase in staffing levels. This will result in a reduction in response times, as well as more time to spend on the quality of life issues that I referred to earlier that community policing agencies need to be focused on. It also increases the amount of time for proactive enforcement measures. In the investigation division, this is going to result in an increase in the time spent handling the complexities of crimes. We are seeing an increase in complexities with regard to computer crimes, with regard to the use of cell phones during criminal activity. In fact, I'm being told that there's hardly a crime committed where there isn't a nexus to a cell phone or a computer these days. We are also going to see having more time to handle the new legal requirements that are coming out. Within the last several years, we have seen new legal requirements on law enforcement with regard to elder abuse crimes, sex offenders, and we've seen the state legislature pass additional requirements on training time. So all of that impacts the availability of our personnel. All of these enhancements, improvements in efficiency and improvements in effectiveness, will result in enhancements to community safety. And with that, I will turn it over to Public Works Director Jay Hutchison to talk about the next segment of this presentation.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, Chief. Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm going to speak a little bit about some public works activities, beginning with a programmatic piece that fits with the programmatic pieces that you've just heard from the previous two speakers. And then we will shift gears to some capital projects. I won't talk about a lot of capital projects, but I'll talk about a few. So let me start first with a programmatic area, and that is the development process, and particularly the building plan review and inspection portion of the development process. You probably recognize the building permit counter that's located in the North Civic Center building. We have about 19,000 people walk in the door each year to visit this facility. That's one every 6 or 7 minutes. What we have been unable to do is get them to time their visits 6 or 7 minutes apart. So occasionally, we do have people in a line, although it's fairly rare. In this particular photograph, which we tried to find with a line, there are also 5 city staff members on the other side of the counter trying to get people through there so that they can get done what they want to get done. The most recent 18 months or so have been very busy. Mr. Doerr pointed out a lot of the things that have been happening in 2014 and into 2015, and I want to just use one slide to kind of highlight some of those activities as well. There's not a scale on the left, but you'll see building permits have been increasing fairly consistently over the last 3 or 4 years, and we saw a significant jump in new dwelling units in 2014. That'd be single-family homes, multifamily. You saw some of those photographs that Mr. Doerr shared that illustrates that increase. So I want to focus on that part of the development process. As you all are aware, there are many departments involved in the development process, and I'll highlight a little bit of that at the end of my comments. Let's talk a little bit about some changes that have been made in staffing and are currently being made in staffing. In 2014, early in 2014, January, I believe, we hired a new plans examiner whose role was to be at the permit counter, helping people at the permit counter with their plan reviews. And you'll see why that's real important here in a couple of minutes. We do a lot of plan reviews while people wait and they leave with their permit. We wanted to supplement that capability, and so in your budget for 2014, there was the addition at the city manager's request for an additional position at the counter, and that's been working out really well. Let's turn to 2015, and with the revised budget that you see today, there's an additional plan reviewer, not for the counter, but they supplement each other, of course, when one's gone on vacation or for some other reason. So that we're in the process right now of looking for an additional plan reviewer, and it's a little bit of a challenge, frankly, in this economy to find qualified people for these kinds of roles, but we'll keep after that one. We've already added in 2015 a part-time plan reviewer that's on call. So this is not a continuing part-time person that works X number of hours every single week. This is an on-call position. We're trying to create both more capacity and more flexibility so that we can respond to the demand as it bounces up and down, as Mr. Dorr has talked about and as you saw in those earlier graphs. We are also in the process right now of identifying a contract company that provides plan reviews so we can also have some additional capacity and flexibility where they can be here when we need them and they won't be involved and won't be an expense when we don't need them. So we're trying to put a package together here, and I think we are in a pretty good position right now to provide that additional capacity and flexibility, which to us translates to a much more responsive program. In addition to the staffing changes that I just described, I want to talk about a couple of other programmatic changes. One is availability online for some additional activities, and I think you're probably aware of some of these items, but just in 2015 we've made 3 additions, and thanks in great part to the Information Technology Department in May, we were able to get payment for permits and contractor registrations online. It does 2 things. It increases convenience. People don't actually have to come into the permit counter to do these activities. But it also increases security. When people are paying for things, we need a secure system so that they don't feel that they're at risk for making a payment online, and that's something that the IT department helped us with as well. In July, we added the availability of some permit applications online. We can't do them all because there are plan reviews that are necessary for some projects, but there are some that are much simpler. You can think of re-roofing or re-siding and some electrical and other kinds of permits for minor systems in various kinds of projects. Those permit applications are now available online. And finally, in August, we added contractor registrations online. So any contractor, regardless of the type of work they can do, can apply for a contractor registration online. They can pay for it online after it's approved. And that also saves time for all of our customers. So essentially what we're trying to do is create more convenience here, which does 2 things. It's better for the customers, but it's also better for our staff because they can focus on some other things instead of having to spend quite as much time face-to-face with people. All of these activities are still available face-to-face for anybody that wants to come in or is not comfortable using the online services. Let me talk a little bit about results, and I'll use January through early August. Over 1,000 projects for permits came in through the permit counter during that period of time. And about 75% of those initial reviews occurred while the person waited. We used to call these over-the-counter reviews, but this is really stick around a little bit. We'll review it right there with you. There's good communication that way. We can ask questions. The applicant can answer questions if something's not clear on a drawing. And they oftentimes leave with their permit. So a very large percentage happen that way. And that's one of the reasons that the additional permit counter plans examiner was added in 2014. About 95% of the initial reviews occur within 4 weeks. Now this number bounces around a bit, as you would guess, with workload and other factors. But the initial reviews, which are the most complex because it's the first time the reviewer has seen the document, it's the first submittal any applicant's made, 95% are within 4 weeks. I'll come back to that other 5% here in a minute. Subsequent reviews, so the second or later reviews, if necessary, are about a 2-week review. They don't take as long, so we try to, and they're already into the process, so we try to move them along a little bit more quickly, and are pretty successful at that. That's pretty reliable. I've been talking about the plan review side, but there's also the construction inspection side. And in many ways, that can be the most important, because that's when most of the money's being spent, is during the construction process itself. So we provide inspections the next day. In fact, if you call in before about 7:30 one morning, you can get the inspection the same day. Most people call in one day and get the inspection the next day. About 99% of the inspections happen that way. Rarely is there one that doesn't get done the next day. And that's an important service, we think, for these kinds of projects. There are some anomalies on the plan review side. I mentioned I'd come back to the 5%. And the 75 and 95% vary a bit as things happen. They vary based on the complexity of the projects that come in, the number of projects that come in, whether they're the kinds of things that can be done over the counter or not. They also depend upon the quality of the plan submittals that we receive. A much higher quality plan submittal, which might be done by a professional architect, can usually get through the process a little more quickly, particularly if they've done projects in Lakewood before. On the other hand, someone who is less experienced, regardless of who it is, it's probably a little bit more review time for our staff to get through those projects. So there are a variety of reasons why something might take a little bit longer. One of the things that we've learned, though, is that we need to be better at communicating how long it will take. It's a very natural question when you hand your plans to the reviewer or somebody at the counter to say, when will I hear back? And we've had a tendency in the past, frankly, almost regularly, to give the very longest possible amount of time. Now, that's good in the sense that we will almost always beat that and make people happy later, but it's bad in the sense that there are times when people are very unhappy with it because it sounds like a very long time, and it's probably more than the 4-week typical. So we're working on our communication. We think we're getting better at that. In fact, generally, we're not answering that question at that moment because we don't have a clue what we're being handed at that very moment. But what we promise to do is get back to them within a week and give them a pretty good time frame. And they'll get a better, more accurate answer if we wait a week. And in a lot of cases, they'll be told you can come in and get your permit because while most 95% are within 4 weeks, that means a lot of those are less than 4 weeks. So we're trying to communicate a little bit more clearly to people and reduce the anxiety level for everyone. One more slide on the development process topic, and these are not new, but I wanted to highlight some things that we think are working really well. A few years ago, we instituted a new process to help projects get to their certificate of occupancy more efficiently. This applies to any new building other than new single-family homes. So it applies to new multifamily buildings, any kind of a commercial building, but a new building. What we had discovered was that because there are many different components to getting a certificate of occupancy, they weren't always being managed well by any party. And the certificate of occupancy has a lot of different important meanings. One is the applicant can occupy the building, which is the obvious meaning. But it also sometimes has to do with changes from construction financing to permanent financing, which is less expensive. It has other kinds of ramifications that are meaningful for contractors, for the designers, for the owner as well. So it's a real important point in the process. It also requires that things on the building be completed that Lakewood pays attention to, that things on the building be completed that the West Metro Fire District pays attention to, that things on the site be completed that the engineering division, the planning department pay attention to, that property actions be taken that our property management folks might pay attention to. So there are a lot of different parts. On the developer's side, there's often a different person involved in each of those steps as well. They may have an engineer, they may have an architect, they may have a builder. What we found was there wasn't a good process on either side to coordinate all of that effort so all the pieces came together at the right time. And it was unfortunately frequent that at least one piece lagged, and then we had this debate. Do we go ahead and issue a certificate of occupancy and try to figure out how to get this last piece done? Is the building safe enough to issue the certificate of occupancy even though a lot of other things are done? A lot of those kind of questions came up. Actually, Karen Phillips deserves much of the credit for this. She works at our permit counter, and she kind of took on a couple of projects as a test, and the pilot project worked, so we continued it. The city now initiates a series of meetings, several months before the applicant desires to have their certificate of occupancy. And we call everybody into the building. And in the first meeting, it's a time to create a list of what has to get done, who's going to do it. It's just a real simple checklist, but it's a complete checklist, something that didn't happen before. From then on, it's a matter of everybody showing up again just to see how we're doing on the checklist. So there's a series of meetings to make sure things are progressing adequately. All the parties are at the table, the owner's at the table, which isn't always the case in some projects. And that way everybody knows what needs to happen, when it needs to happen, and it's really been very successful. And we even have applicants now coming in asking us to teach other communities how to do it, and some have adopted it. And we have applicants coming in saying, you are going to do this again, right, on a new project. So it's been a real success. The West Metro Fire folks I mentioned earlier, they are a very important part of the process. They're responsible for the fire code, which affects all new buildings and many expansions or other kinds of projects. And Bruce Crawl, the fire marshal at West Metro, has been fantastic. He has really integrated with the city's team, the city's development assistance team, and made it as seamless as it can possibly be, I think, when there's two actually totally different agencies with different responsibilities. Finally, I do want to compliment the multi-departmental team. We call it the development assistance team. It is probably, well, I think it is, the largest multi-departmental, regularly meeting team that this organization, this whole city has. And it's very effective, and they think about each other's needs and try not to let anything become silos, a term that I hate and they don't allow to happen. It's a team that really understands that one decision can affect another part of a project, and so they need to integrate their comments. It's a team that knows that we want to be one city giving one set of comments, so the developer can deal with that instead of having to deal with a series of comments and try to figure out whether or not they're consistent or compatible. So compliments to that group as well. So that's a whole lot of good stuff. Let me tell you, we're not perfect. We make mistakes. We find ways to improve and want to keep doing that. Sometimes we hear very general comments, and they're difficult to deal with. It's hard to find ways to even develop an understanding of what an issue might be when we get general comments. So I encourage you, as many of you have in the past, to give us the specifics or connect us to the person who knows the specifics. If we can talk to the person who was directly affected, sometimes that helps us as well in finding a better way to do some things. With that, let me be the transition speaker here, and we'll move away from some of these programmatic items and move into some capital projects. I'm going to talk about just a few, and then we'll move to the Community Resources Department, and Kit Newland will inform you about a number of projects that have been happening in the community as well. First, I want to talk about the Civic Center Plaza, and you'll remember that this is really one phase of a three-phase project that started a couple of years ago. This is an aerial photo that will orient us to all three phases. You're looking down on the Civic Center and Public Safety Center complex. You can see Allison Parkway running diagonally through the picture. As you're looking at it, Wadsworth is off to the right a little ways. Alameda is up off the top of the picture there. In the upper right, you'll see a blue box that says Phase 1 Drive Lane. It just is outside of this building, outside of the Cultural Center. It also included a fair amount of work on the parking garage below. That phase is complete. Phase 2 is the Civic Center Plaza between the two Civic Center buildings. It's nearly complete, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in detail here in a couple of minutes. And then Phase 3 coming up, starting construction next year, will be over at the Public Safety Center. It's exterior work. It includes some work on the garage, the drive aisle between the Safety Center office building and the garage, and the connecting bridges, all three connecting bridges, which I'll touch on here in a couple of minutes as well. All told, all three phases, the budget was about $6.6 million, and nearing the end of Phase 2, we're on target for that. It looks like it's all going to work out within that budget. And you may remember that the budget actually developed over a series of years. Initially, there wasn't a lot of scope. There wasn't a complete understanding of the design or even a complete understanding of the problems. We had what we could see as being problems, and then we identified some other things. We identified that we wanted to be able to have buses on the drive lane, and we identified that we wanted to have a little higher quality plaza, and some of those things were identified and the design more complete as we went through it. So the budget evolved, as you know. over the series of, I think, 2 or 3 budgets. So let's take a look at the plaza. Here it is last week. A good bit different. This is from on top of this building that we're sitting in right now. And I'll walk you through a few of the features. This is the feature that you won't see until the winter comes. This is part of the snowmelt system. It's underneath the plaza pavers that you see out there and some of the walkways. This is here primarily because a lot of this sits on top of a parking garage. And much of the deterioration that we experienced was because of the freeze-thaw cycles, the parking garage and the drainage system associated with the parking garage, which you might remember used to leak more than it does now, and the chemicals that would be used to try to manage the ice and snow on top of the plaza area. With the snowmelt system, which will be heated fluid running through these coils, which will heat up the pavers, and then the water can actually soak down between the pavers, we should be able to eliminate all of those problems. We won't need to use the de-icing chemicals, so that'll reduce the deterioration. We've got a better drainage system to get the water out of there so it won't cause deterioration on the parking garage structure itself. So that should be invisible until we see the first few snowstorms, which I will be anxiously looking out my window when that happens. This is the east end of the plaza. You see the curved benches there. Those are around the fountain, which will be operational here very shortly this week, I believe. And then there's some grass area as well. You may remember that the fountain was one of the great draws for the plaza. It was one of the areas that drew kids, families, and they loved playing in the water, and parents would be there, so they've got some seating now. There's some grass on this side now that wasn't there before that will allow the kids to have a place to play. And there will be a few other features that you can discover as you explore the plaza that I think the kids will enjoy as well. There's a fair amount of seating along the plaza as well for major events, but also this was a lunchtime here last week when there was another kind of event going on. It was a beautiful day. Apparently it was Khaki Pants Day if you look at the folks in the front. And the planters all have xeric planting in them, so there'll be low water use planting, and they will develop over the next couple of years, and what I think are going to be some beautiful, beautiful planters. The rotating art program is back. You may remember that for years the city's had art out there that about annually or so would change. The newest art just went up about a week ago, and there are 6 pieces that are in the rotating program. The pedestals, however, that the art sits on, you'll see them virtually identical in these 2 photos, will be permanent. And that will both provide a nice display for the art, but also protect the deck from holes being drilled into the parking structure that cause some of the leaks that we don't want to have anymore. So there are 6 pieces out there already, and those will be there for about a year. This is the Dance of the Indian Paintbrush, a Tim Upham work that is a permanent art piece that I'm sure you've seen as you've walked into this building, and it's a beautiful, intriguing kind of piece. I tend to stop and look at it almost every time I go by. And from a different view, you can see another addition here. This bench that you see in the front is right next to the drive aisle. This will provide a place for people to be dropped off when they're coming to the cultural center or other events, or perhaps more helpfully, they'll be able to sit and rest for a moment while they wait for their driver to come pick them up. I haven't identified who the drivers are, but I will leave that for the people who want to ride. I don't think it's me, but I may learn later it is. Finally, kind of an overview of the cultural center, the plaza, and you'll notice the canopy on the left. This is really the new cultural center venue. You know what the indoor theater looks like. This is now an outdoor venue right at the cultural center as well, and you can look forward to some programming there that's beginning to be developed. I'm not sure why, but Public Works wasn't asked to do the programming development, but this Thursday will be that first event where there's some programming. So you and all the public are invited to come from 5 to 7:30 here on the plaza and enjoy a celebration of the reopening of the plaza and the first programmed event in the outdoor venue at the Cultural Center. With that, let me shift to the next phase in this municipal area, and that's the Public Safety Center exterior repairs. This is a view looking from essentially the Dance of the Indian Paintbrush across towards the Safety Center. And you'll notice the pedestrian bridge that goes across Allison and leads over to the main Public Safety Center entrance. This is the main entrance in the center of the building. And you'll notice some asphalt patches in the roadway and some over in the sidewalk area as well. This is the underside of the bridge that crosses Allison, the pedestrian bridge. And there you can see some materials that have leaked through the bridge. And so there's a little bit of repair work that will happen on that bridge, both top and bottom. This is just to the west of that bridge as you approach the Public Safety Center entrance. For those of you who think back and remember far enough back, this used to be a roadway that connected to Allison Street. Allison used to be up at this level. So this was a road, and it's kind of remained appearing as a roadway. It's a fairly barren, stark area, and yet it's a major entrance into the Public Safety Center for the public. We think we can do some better things there, including making a better environment physically. You can see a puddle of water there that's an ice rink in the winter that needs to be taken care of. Here's another view of some of those patches out in the concrete pavement. This is actually on one of the sidewalks, so as this deterioration has occurred over time, there's trip hazards that have been created. We've got some deterioration on some of the stairways as well that can create those same kinds of problems that we want to cure. This is one of the pedestrian bridges across between the parking garage and the office building at the Public Safety Center. Again, another puddle that is conveniently located right in the middle, unfortunately, and can be an ice area as well. And some deterioration around the drain on one of those bridges. It's a little tough to see here, but these are some of the other stairways where there's some deterioration in the steps that some of the concrete's spalling off as well. Briefly, the timeline, the design is underway now. Construction bids will be accepted this fall with construction beginning in the spring and not knowing what next winter will be like, anticipating construction completing in 2016 as well. The final thing that I want to do is look just for a moment at the drawing that illustrates some of the improvements that are planned. On the lower part of this slide is the public safety building. It's only the east half of the public safety building. So the main entrance to the public safety building is on the left side of this slide where the word bridge is located. And then the parking garage you can see to the north, and on the right you can see Allison Parkway in the upper right corner with the pedestrian bridge crossing Allison Parkway as well. I mentioned earlier that this used to be a road, and we want to take some of that area that was the road and turn it into kind of an extension of the plaza. So all these public facilities are kind of connected together. So that big barren area that you saw earlier is going to have two kinds of new features. One is it'll have a few more trees and an area that's a little softer. It will also have some more plaza-like features, including some of those rock benches that you see out in this plaza here at the Civic Center. There will be some artwork as well to carry some of the public art over to the other side of Allison Street as well, and some additional plantings, some disabled parking right near the front of the building. So a variety of kinds of changes here. But those aren't the only ones. The other repairs that I showed you, the concrete repairs, some repairs in the parking garage itself will also happen. So it's a fairly extensive project. One last project that I want to talk about really is a follow-up to an action that you took last year when you supplemented the sidewalk program. You may remember that the Capital Improvement Fund has an annual sidewalk allocation of roughly $300,000 per year. And last year you made the decision to add a $2 million one-time supplement to that program. That supplement will be a significant funding component of doing some additional sidewalk along Sheridan. This is the west side of Sheridan, of course. The east side is Denver. And this is from 6th Avenue to 10th Avenue. And I should tell you that Sheridan has been a long-term effort in the sidewalk program. You can go back more than 30 years, I think, and have sidewalk projects along Sheridan. It had no sidewalks, and incrementally we've made progress. This is the last large segment, so that's good news. You may remember that the supplement last year was $2 million that you added to the program. This is about probably in the range of a $3 million project. So another $200,000 from your typical annual program allocation. And then we were able to get a grant through the Colorado Department of Transportation for about $800,000. Collectively, almost a $3 million project. There's a little bit of refinement of scope happening now, so there's some possibility that'll change, but we're going to be in that range. With the grant, as you know, grants sometimes drive timing. And so the design will happen next year and construction will happen in 2017. Part of that's driven by the timing of the grant. Let's take a little walk down Sheridan and see what kind of a value this investment is. This is a little bit south of 10th Avenue. You're looking south, and we'll continue walking south as we go through several slides. You're looking toward 9th Avenue. So in the very foreground of the picture, there's some old asphalt parking lot, a little bit of concrete, and then there's a path that people have worn in the grass farther down this photograph. If you move a little bit further south, there's actually side-by-side paths, and there's a reason for that. It feels a whole lot safer if you're on the upper path, but if you go a little bit further, there is only a lower path. And so right next to Sheridan Boulevard, an arterial street with 40-mile-an-hour traffic on it, a little tiny width there that is all that's available through this particular stretch. So as you can imagine, there's going to have to be some driveway realignment, there's going to have to be some excavation, some retaining walls built, some things that have happened on some of the other Sheridan projects much further to the south. Let's take a few more steps to the south. This is approaching the frontage road at 6th Avenue. The bridge you see in the background is the 6th Avenue overpass looking south still. And again here, there's a small stretch of sidewalk and then a long gap all the way to 6th Avenue. Here's looking from the frontage road onto the south. Again, the path here gets over to the road not because of a hill going up, but because there's a hill going down. And if you want to end up on the other side of 6th Avenue, you have to stay up near the high side next to Sheridan Boulevard again. Oops, I jumped slightly too quickly. So this project is going to result in an 8-foot wide paved path, detached from the sidewalk. We think that'll be able to be handled all the way up and down this whole project. Of course, that'll require some time to design and obtain the property rights and work with the property owners so that we can do that in a way that works for everybody as best as possible, which is what we've done on other Sheridan projects. And just as a last comment, a compliment, I think, for the addition that you put into this program last year. This project, given its cost, would have been about a 10-year accumulation of money in order to pay for it without that 1-year, $2 million allocation and the grant. That means no other projects for 10 years, putting aside money for 10 years just to do this piece. So with the grant and the 1-year allocation, we're able to knock this out much more quickly, and we're happy to be able to do that. With that, I will transition and depart this lectern and invite Kit Newland, the Director of the Community Resources, up to discuss some more projects.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Jay.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Kit Newland, Director of Community Resources. And I'll be talking to you tonight about capital projects that we've either completed over the course of the last year or that we're going to be working on in the upcoming year. So I wanted to start with our neighborhood participation projects. Here you see the Mount Air Park Shelter that we completed earlier this year. This has been a wonderful addition to the park. It's near the playground and it's being very well used. Oh, I want to go back just to that slide for a second. We also added a sport court up on the northwest portion of the park, and that as well has been very, very well used. It's near the parking lot, near the street. It's very visible, and we see it being used quite often. At Green Gables Park, we added a new playground. That was greeted with lots of kids when it opened on June 1st. Perfect timing because that was the first day that the kids were out of school. At Carmody Park, you can see our recently completed little library. This is a new thing we're hearing a lot about. This is on the east side of the park near Hoyt Street, and this is something that we're sure that the neighbors are going to take a lot of advantage of. At Mulholland Park, we added a swing, and in addition to that, we completed repaired concrete around the perimeter of that amenity and added a wheelchair ramp. Couple of projects at Morris Park this year. We're close to completing this restroom renovation, which improves the bathroom privacy, lighting, and accessibility. And then also at Morris Park this spring we added 5 of these bicycle racks. There's Daisy the dog hanging out at the bike racks. Some other capital projects that we've been working on, Ritchie Park playground replacement is going to be under design here in the next couple weeks. That's primarily funded through some CDBG funding. We'll also be putting in a new surface at that playground. Dry Gulch Trail, we got some open space funding last year, and we're still working with development in that area to get that project complete. At Bear Creek Lake Park, the longest trail project ever. It just seemed like it went on and on forever. It was about a mile of hard surface trail replacement. 50% of that was funded through GOCO, and we finally did get that project completed, and it's beautiful. At Addenbrook, we're working on replacing path lights and with LED lighting, which we're very excited about. And just a little over a week ago, we welcomed people to the new Patterson Cottages Nature Quest classroom. It's beautiful, beautiful play learning space. As you all know, children spend much less time outdoors than they ever have, previous generations have, and this impacts children's ability to learn. Recent research is also showing how play outside and time spent outside, actually helps to reduce anxiety and stress. And in some of these families, there are a lot of factors that play into stress and anxiety, and so time spent outside is really going to be a huge benefit to them. This is going to support their social and emotional learning, as well as physical and motor skills, and a wide variety of other opportunities. The space is absolutely gorgeous, and it kind of makes you want to get down there and play like a kid again. There's all kinds of hands-on learning, including a place to build with construction projects. There's a place for water play, mud play, sand, music, movement, performing arts, and there's also a beautiful garden area, a garden that the children themselves participate in planting, and then they also get to harvest when they come back to school this time of year. So there's just all kinds of opportunities for enhanced learning. Some of the other cool little things about this project are that there's 6 types of fruit trees there, 26 species of perennials, 19 species of shrubs, and 2/3 of this project was funded through our community partners. So I don't want to leave that little piece out. Was so important to this project. It was hugely collaborative, and we had so many great partners participating. And lastly, we were able to take a lot of materials from some of our other projects and repurpose them and reuse them at this site. Some pavers and some flagstone and lots of wood. So it's quite beautiful. And if you haven't had a chance to see it, I'd invite you to, I'll take you over there for a little visit. Next is the Daniels Community Center. We spent the summer working on doing some ADA renovations at this facility. It's very well used for children's programs since about the 90s, and it needed some serious updating, and it's almost finished. We hope to have this project done and have kids back in there on Tuesday next week. We've been working on some partnerships with our school district and with Great Outdoors Colorado. The first one, and this one you see here pictured, is the Foothills Field of Dreams. That was opened in the spring, and it's quite a wonderful project, also a very community collaborative project. This is the first one we completed, which was actually a local government grant, but then the next one was the Green Mountain Elementary Schoolyard, and at that project they did a full-size football field as well as a new playground. And now we're also working with Westgate Elementary, Westgate Park, to design a new play yard there. And then the next 3 of these projects are large capital projects that are included in the budget before you. And this first one is the Link Recreation Center pool up renovation project. You see here the pirate ship, which is the entry feature to the pool. The pool was an added amenity that we opened in 2002, and this has kind of been an iconic feature for this facility. However, it's the pool itself has really experienced a lot of corrosion and rusting, and primarily due to air circulation issues. So we're looking at some renovation here on this facility and also in the locker room facility here. One of the issues that we had a study conducted last year, one of the issues that we learned is that the lighting is not quite what it needs to be in this facility. And you can see here, excuse me, that it tends to get a little bit dark and doesn't have quite the warm feel that we would like it to. This just shows you some of the rusting and corrosion that we're experiencing here. The air circulation in this facility is not, as I said, up to what it should be for a facility with so much humidity. So we're going to be, that'll be one of the top priorities with this project, is to improve the circulation of the air. Well, these are the beams to support the slide, and this at the bottom. The picture is the stairway up to the pirate ship. The visibility that I wanted to mention here is in regard to the amount of space that the pirate ship actually takes up. The fact that you can't see through it. So we need to staff this pool with extra lifeguards so that we don't, so that we have our eyes on swimmers at all times. So we're looking to improve by taking out this pirate ship. I know this is going to be an impact to some of our.
It ain't so.
I know. Sorry. I know. but it's going to be just as nice. It just won't be a pirate ship. So we need to open that up a little bit and make it safer and also make it welcoming for our families. This is some of the locker room deterioration, countertops, and the stalls, and the locker room floor where it's buckling and popping. This is a rendering, just an example of what you might see in the new pool. Bright light, warm feel, and lots of visibility from anywhere on the deck. Next large project is the Carmody roof replacement, and specifically the barrel roof over the pool and a couple of the roofs over the gymnasium, which you can't see in this slide. But we had a study done last year and learned that, as we thought, the roof leaks are fairly significant, especially in the pool. As far as we've been able to tell, since that roof was put on in '76, it has not been replaced fully. There was a repair done in 2003, but the full roof hasn't been replaced, and it desperately needs it. There's some damage being done to the interior wood structure. So that's going to be done, and also with we'll be doing the roofs on the gymnasium, and then we expect that project to start this fall. And then last but not least, and I've mentioned this before, we're working on a site plan. Well, we've completed a site plan for the Carmody Park, and the piece you see in red there is the first phase of this project. We did receive funding from Jefferson County Open Space last year, a significant amount, $435,000, and we're going back to GOCO next year for some additional funding to help support this project. So the most important feature, the priority for us, was to try to improve the traffic circulation and provide some additional parking. This is, if you've ever been over there when there's a swim meet going on or there's a soccer practices going on, it's significantly overpacked. So we're adding some space, we're improving the way that the traffic circulates, and then more interestingly and excitingly, we're adding a universally accessible playground. So we're very excited to be able to add that to one of our parks. We do not have a playground like this yet in Lakewood. And then we hope that we'll be able to add a restroom facility as well as a shelter with that improvement. So with that completes my part of the presentation, and I'd like to invite Larry Dorr back up to the podium.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Newland. Let's see. Let me go ahead and proceed to wrap up the portion of the city's budget presentation, and then we can have questions, answers, and discussion before, Mr. Mayor, we move on to the Lakewood Reinvestment Authority. Well, one of the things you'd want to know about this budget that is before you is, does it meet the requirements under first the state law and city charter? We have some requirements to meet there in statute. First, you see here related to reserves required under Tabor, and then, of course, the budget being filed on time with Department of Local Affairs, and on and on. This budget will meet those requirements. And then in our city charter, we have some references to revenues exceeding expenditures utilizing reserves, and the city manager shall submit a budget before a certain date, and we're meeting all of that criteria. You notice that this study session is not required under either of those. So again, kudos to that. The only thing left to do is have the budget adopted via a vote before November 1st, and we should have no trouble meeting that as well. Each year for the last 15 years, the city has received the Distinguished Budget Presentation Award from the Government Finance Officers Association of the United States and Canada. This is a venerable organization, over 100 years old, 18,000 members across the country. Only about 30 city governments in the state of Colorado receive the Distinguished Budget Presentation Award. This is for the 2015 budget, which was adopted a year ago. And the criteria is over 200 items long. All of those elements that are presented in the budget document itself, the book, that is, all of our forecast, strategic plan, all of our programmatic elements, all of those things are required in order to receive this Distinguished Budget Presentation Award. And it's really a team effort, to say the least. So one, our job in finance is to merely facilitate all of the various departments, be it not just the departments, but be it capital projects, staffing, and so clearly all of our departments and all of their division managers, our employee relations department and city manager's office work throughout the year together, not just to meet the criteria, but to make the budget happen as it is. So I want to thank all of those contributors for making, first of all, this budget document as a communication piece top-notch, and obviously it meets the criteria. And we believe that this 2016 budget as drafted will meet the criteria as well, and we will be submitting it to the GFOA for award. With that, I just have kind of a closing comment and something that oftentimes feels abstract, but I think it's important to mention, and that is the core community values as set forth by the City Council. Everything that we do as a city should connect to these core values, be it public safety, transportation, quality living environment, and you've seen that, I think, throughout this presentation tonight. You can't do any one of these things well without doing all of them well, and I think that we're doing it as a community. So let me just close with a couple of reminders. Of course, these are our activities to date, and we'll have just a couple more to go in order to get the budget adopted and published in time to meet all of the criteria. So with that, I'd like to give just one more thanks, and that is that two council members, for sure, Barraway and Quinn, this is your 8th year reviewing city budgets, and I just know that next summer you're going to wake up in a cold sweat, and something's going to be missing from your lives, and it will be the city budget. But I invite you down to Chambers on this side to have a little fun with it. And then last but certainly not least, I want to thank you, Mayor Murphy, for 16 budgets adopted under your service as mayor and city councilman. So this is your sweet 16. And I want to thank you for your passion and your veracity for public finance and budgeting. So nice job and thank you. With that, I'll just return to these seats here, and if you would indulge me, I'd like to address a couple of things happening in the book itself that are outside of the general fund scope, and I think that will perhaps answer some questions for
I'd anticipate some of the questions. Great, thank you. As you're moving to your seat, I had one question for Kit. You mentioned some deferred maintenance on Carmody on the roof that maybe went back to 1976. That was an acquisition, right, from Foothills, right? So the city of Lakewood has not actually owned it that long. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor and members of council. This is a little unusual for me to point to sections in the book. Typically, I get questions from you, and myself and the city manager and department heads will address those for you. But I look at the numbers, particularly if you would care to join me on page 64. I'm looking at the all funds budget, and you're going to see some numbers there that should stand out to you. I'm sure they do. They stand out to me, and they deserve some discussion and attention for a number of reasons. One, they reflect some of the services that you've already heard about tonight, but also some business changes that I'll identify, and I think this will probably answer some questions that you already have. First of all funds. I mentioned earlier that 2/3 of the city's expenses are from the general fund, and a fund is really just a set of books and records separate from some other fund. And other funds include Capital Improvement Fund, Heritage, Culture, and the Arts Fund. We have some internal service funds. Of course, we have enterprise and utility funds as well, like the golf course fund. They're all presented here on this page 64. And naturally, if you were to look at it, you would see some numbers that really sort of stand out to you. And if I may, let me just start with the first outlier, and that's first in our non-departmental. You'll notice that the spending, and I'm just going to reflect expenditures for this piece. You'll notice that the spending increases by an 8-figure number, and I don't think you've ever seen that before. It's highly unusual. And it first relates to a business change that's happening as an organization, and that is the city provides medical and dental benefits to its workers, and for many, many years, the city has been fully insured, and that means we pay premiums to insurance companies to provide for those benefits for the workers. We've become self-insured, and what that requires is funds to be paid into an internal service fund, and then in turn paid out for claims, catastrophic insurance, and third-party administration. So it's a change in business. There's no new spending. There aren't any new benefits. There aren't any new initiatives other than this very pragmatic and strategic business decision that was undertaken very carefully over a number of years. And I want to thank our Director of Employee Relations Mr. Jeff Dolan for taking us to the next level. If you look at any Fortune 100 company, they will be self-insured for these kinds of worker benefits because essentially that cost that would otherwise be paid to an insurer is retained by the employer. And that's what we'll be doing. We're confident that we will save money over the long haul by doing this, but it takes time to build reserves, and it does take an acceptance of fluctuating risks and cost over time. So in the non-departmental, that entire change, you notice it's $10 million in spending in 14. It goes to $25 million in 16. All of that is attributable to that self-insurance business decision. And maybe I'll work from the bottom to the top if it's just easier. You see in our Public Works Department, by the way, I should mention that spending is happening in our internal service fund. It's not happening in the general fund. But again, this presentation is all spending. One notch up, you see Public Works. And if you want a little bit more information on what's going on in Public Works, substantially, and I think I think Mayor and Council, all of you know this, but I want to describe it for the public. And that is that Public Works is involved in very substantial roadway projects each year. Now, Mr. Hutchison did outline some changes in programming, and he did talk to you about some capital projects like the Sheridan Corridor sidewalks. But if you want to get a little feel for the grant work that's happening, we do, as a city naturally, work very hard to get Lakewood taxpayer monies paid to the federal government and the state back to Lakewood. So if you take a look at pages 76 and 77, you'll see the various grants, federal and state grants, that are received by the city from one year to the next. And they do vary quite substantially because these projects take a lot of time to design and implement and construct. So those funds vary quite widely. And so that's what's going on in Public Works. If you go one step above, Chief Paletta talked a little bit about his staffing and what's happening there. I won't elaborate too much on that. Our Chief Information Officer, Mark Prey, talked a little bit about what's happening in information technology, which also has a very substantial capital component to it. And I've sort of flung open the door to all of the things happening in the departments. And then in our Mayor and City Manager's Office, City Manager's Office, we have had some increase in spending there related to Fed Center legal and consulting matters. We presented that a year ago. However, we've changed funding there from one year to another just to reflect better information on that as we go forward. So I wanted to touch on these police, public works, and non-departmental matters just to address how the funding can change from one year to the next. Because obviously you look at expenditures 14, $148 million, and then quite a lot larger in 2016. So I felt it would be useful. Thank you for flipping through the pages with me here, but I think that probably answered a number of questions.
Appreciate that, Larry. And yes, grants received are included in all funds, which is the moral of that story in at least a couple of those departments. Quick follow-up from Councilor Paul on that self-insurance question.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Dorr, so if I'm following you correctly, when we look at the 14 actual at 10 10.7, and then the jump to 22. That 10.7 would include our current employee benefit costs, and then we jump to 22 to start to create those reserves. Is that accurate?
Well, let me first describe the non-departmental and just give a really large example. To answer your question, that 10.7 million includes other non-departmental activities that we can't really attribute to any one department. So, for example, City Hall, the Civic Center, has an annual mortgage payment. It's $2,400,000. It doesn't make sense to attribute that either to the finance department or the city manager's office or any one department, and it would be too much work and wouldn't make a lot of sense to divvy it up by department. No, we just attribute that $2,400,000 payment to the non-departmental department. And there are other expenses in there as well that aren't necessarily tied to one specific function. So the 10.7 is sort of our base, if I may say it that way. Because in 2014, we were not self-insured for these things. And then 22.2 million is roughly the 15 and 15 revised. Now, we provide medical and dental insurance. Every year, the program year is beginning April 1st. So 2015 is just 3/4 of a year, and then 2016 would be the first full calendar year. So thank you for bearing with me. But also in non-departmental, we have the city's general liability and property casualty insurance. So it costs over $2 million to insure all the city's vehicles, buildings, and other things. We've been self-insured in that area for over 15 years, to my knowledge. And so we have those activities happening in there as well. Did that make sense? Or was that helpful?
Yeah, I can come back to it.
Very well.
Councilor Wickman?
I'm not going to go into the weeds, but I did have one question. Did I read this correctly that it said that we're giving a pay raise of 3.5% for all employees, but that police agents would be getting less than 3%? Did I read that right?
I'd have to look at the exact page, but one of the things we do just to step back is we ask our employee relations department, first of all, it does surveys every single year, both in our sworn and non-sworn work categories. And they're surveying agencies across the state, of course, and we have to build a budget based on those estimates and forecasts. So I'd have to check, but I think right off the top, my recollection is that our forecast, and that's what it is for 2016, is 3.5% for our non-sworn, and I believe it's 2.9% for our sworn. And in years past, when we get the actual survey in each January and then implement compensation adjustments, sometimes more or less is needed in one or the other areas, and we respond to that within our given appropriations. And so sometimes the survey comes in, it needs to be a little bit less, and that's what gets done in the market. Other times it needs to be a little bit greater, and we need to either find existing savings or have additional appropriations from council. So I believe those are the two numbers for 2016.
Okay, well, I won't debate it now, but when the time comes, I think it's inappropriate for our sworn staff to get less than our civilian staff. If they get more, that would be fine, but in my mind, they should be at least be getting the same, so we'll debate that later.
I think there is a little more than meets the eye to this, and I see the chief nodding his head. We also have an ordinance in the city of Lakewood, as I recall, requires that we pay our police agents not just more than the average in the metro area, but 1% more than the highest, 1% more than the next highest agency in the metro area by ordinance.
Are you telling me we're forbidden to give them even more? All right, we'll not debate it. We won't debate it today.
I'm reminding you, Councilor Wickman, of a policy that we have here in the city of Lakewood to take good care of our police agents' pay. All right. Question. I just have. I'm going to have. I got to make one comment here as I was paging through the. I think the city manager's budget message, which I always find interesting every year. Ms. Hodson, I looked at the, I guess, page 37. You know, we all hate to pay taxes, and we hear so often about from some folks about a high tax environment. It is fascinating to see, for example, property taxes that 25 mills goes to Jefferson County, 50 mills goes to the Jefferson County School District, 13.5 mills goes to West Metro Fire. So out of 95 mills, 4.7 of that goes to the city of Lakewood. Translated, if you pay $1,000 in property tax, less than $50 goes to the city of Lakewood. And then corresponding to that, on the next page, or actually page 39, is sales tax rates in the Denver metro area and neighboring communities. Lakewood is tied for the second lowest sales tax rate in the metro area. The only city lower than us is my friend Jim Gunning's city, Lone Tree, which we often joke is the city of Park Meadows, right? So my point is, this is comparatively a very, very low tax environment that we have here in the city of Lakewood. Councilor Barraway, I think you're next.
We're just doing questions now. Or
Yeah.
do some comments? And this, I don't know if that's for Jay or for Larry, maybe the two of you combined, but Larry, just in reference as one example on the Sheridan Street, which I'm so happy is going to happen. The Two Creeks Group's been waiting for that for I think probably my whole 8 years on council, so very happy to see that happen. But if I look at page 76, where you pointed out the grant revenues, it says, I'm guessing that means federal Sheridan Boulevard sidewalks, federal money of $1 million, correct? And then if I go to page 476 and 477, and Jay had mentioned earlier we were using the $2 million that the city council had agreed to put in for extra sidewalks, plus we got an $800,000 grant. Is the $800,000 part of this $1 million? I'm just trying to track.
It is, and I beg your pardon. One of the things we do is we're conservative in our grant applications, and I think we have the idea that it could be even a little bit larger, and so we've got that reported here. But Mr. Hutchison has our best estimate, but just in the event that would occur, and somehow we might be able to persuade the grantors to have a little bit of a larger grant, we've got that bigger number presented here. That's not uncommon, and we do have some grants that come in during the year for which we've appropriated some contingencies around those so that we can get the work done as opposed to waiting for the annual budget cycle. So yes, those are all one and the same.
Okay. So then on page 476, it's anticipated that First Avenue from Newland to Harlan construction will be completed in 2016. Funds from this program are included in the Sheridan Boulevard Improvements Project. So is that maybe where the extra $200,000 went?
Yes, the program that you just mentioned on page 476, that's the ongoing amount that shows generally $300,000 per year, bumping up to $500,000 in a couple of years.
Okay.
We had to move $200,000 from there over to the Sheridan project to reach that full $3 million with the $2 million supplemental appropriation, the $800,000 grant, and the $200,000 from the existing funding.
Okay, great. Thank you. I just want to make sure that we've got it all correct and that the money's there because we do want to see that happen on 6th
Yes,
Avenue.
the money is there.
Thank you. On 10th, between 6th and 10th. Thank you.
I think one of the lessons that we learned here is this large initial investment that we made in sidewalks takes a lot of time to implement. And in the case of the Sheridan project through 2017, so perhaps it's time to take a little bit of a pause and get some of these things implemented and revisit that next year or the year after in terms of additional sidewalk funding. Councilor Paul?
I have two questions, one for Larry, one for the chief. Larry, back to where we were at on the self-insurance, which I think is a good move. When do you anticipate seeing those numbers come back down when we start to realize our savings?
You know, we believe this is a 5-year proposition that we really need to measure the success of this program over that period of time. Now, that's a bit long, and our internal team is meeting each quarter to look at our trends and find opportunities for savings. But I have to tell you, we've budgeted to spend less in the coming 12 months than we budgeted for that same period a year ago. So we believe right out of the gate we're going to have some savings, but that new baseline we think will grow just because the cost of prescriptions and medication and so forth are what they are and will continue to increase. So more on that later, but so far our first quarter review, we started April 1st, we reviewed this in mid-July. We're feeling confident about the direction that it's going.
Thank you. Chief, attrition. So we're adding 8 sworn, or the request is for 8 sworn. How are we doing I know we've fluctuated in the last 8 years I've been on council. We've seen upticks and whatnot. So how are we doing there?
We've been running fairly steady at about a 5% attrition rate. We do have a committee that meets quarterly to take a look at attrition. That consists of the Director of Employee Relations, the Finance Director, and myself, along with members of our staff. We take a look at historic attrition for the past couple of years. We take a look at any projections that we might anticipate in terms of retirement or people leaving for a specific reason, and we project a recruit class size based on those. With this year's request, we will add the additional personnel on top of that.
All right. Thank you.
If I may add to that, Chief Paletta has implemented a 2 academy process. Once upon a time, we only had 1 academy per year, and his sworn agent staff would have peaks and valleys because it takes over 12 months to have a recruit out in the field. But now, with 2 academies per year, he's able to have a little bit more stability in that. So kudos there.
Councillor Harrison?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And as usual, Mr. Dorr, you made numbers understandable. Thank you ever so much. I really appreciate that. I wanna follow up with the sidewalk question. Okay, if we're doing 4 blocks, so I'm looking at from 6th Avenue to 10th Avenue, correct? And it's potentially a little bit more than that? Yeah. Okay, on both sides or just one side?
Just the west side.
Okay, so we're looking at $3 million for that, correct? That cost.
Yes.
That seems like a lot more than normal, let me put it that way. Is it because of the acquisition costs and the slope of those sidewalks and whatnot? Is that where the additional cost is coming in there?
Yes, this is probably one of the more expensive areas to put in a sidewalk, and it is exactly the kinds of things you spoke of. The physical conditions out there mean that the construction is going to cost more. There are going to be retaining walls that sometimes we don't have to provide. There will be driveway reconstructions to get the driveways to match into the sidewalks and still serve the properties. We'll be replacing some things that are out there now that just need to be replaced. So the construction is going to be more expensive. The second thing is exactly the property rights component. As you know, when we need to acquire property rights for any kind of a public project, we acquire those at fair market value. We need to work through that with appraisers and also with the property owners, so that takes a little time and expense. And then those rights will be acquired in a fair fashion so that the property can, or the walks can be in the appropriate location. And particularly along a busy street like this, we like to have some separation, if we can, to make it as comfortable a walking environment as we possibly can. And this is a little wider than some walks. Sometimes we build 5-foot walks. This is a location where we think 8 foot is more appropriate. It provides more capacity. It provides a place for some bicyclists who are interested in getting off the road to ride. Many don't want to do that, but some do. So there's a combination of things that do make this a more expensive project. And I should just refer back to one of my earlier comments, and that is that we don't have a design. We don't have a final understanding of what the grant requirements are. So there's probably some adjustment that will happen here. We think we've budgeted plenty of money. We think, if anything, this one may actually cost a little bit less than what we're showing in the budget. But at this point, that we think that's a prudent number.
Just thank you very much. I think that really helps me a lot. If people are watching this evening and wanted to know what the average cost per block, if that's for flat sidewalk, what would that be?
I don't usually give a single number, and this is a good example of why.
Okay.
Even on a street where you don't have these kinds of grade problems, where you're not going to have to build retaining walls, sometimes we get into drainage situations and we have to actually build stormwater inlets and perhaps put in pipe. Sometimes we have to build curb and gutters. Sometimes we have to build narrower, wider walks. Sometimes they're next to the road. Sometimes the land's already there and publicly owned. So there's a really quite a wide range of numbers for sidewalk construction.
He's not going to give it up. No.
Yeah, I was going to try, but I can see
Not
it's
gonna
just
give it
not
up.
working. And then my third comment would be, I want to really compliment Mr. Dolan about looking at doing a self-funded insurance policy. That's really a good step. And the first year of that concept is, it looks the most expensive because you've got to put the money kind of in the savings account for the claims. That's kind of what part of it is doing. So the first year it looks horrible. The second, third, fourth, and fifth years, when you start seeing the savings, it'll look really good. But this first year it looks a little expensive, but it'll be a really good decision. And hats off to him and city manager for coming up with that. Thank you.
Our two insurance professionals up here, along with Councilor Barroway, vigorously endorse this move. Councilor Shakti.
The discussion about the permitting office. So I understand that there's been a high load of permits, which is great, and also that we're looking at, it sounded like a lot of thought had gone into all the different aspects of how to make sure that we're meeting the needs. I was curious, so the ones that are not dealt with that day, so 75% are dealt with that day. The ones that are not, well, how do we compare to other permitting offices? Like, is a month a reasonable amount of time?
We find that 4 weeks usually works out pretty well, and we don't do an extensive survey of other organizations to find out exactly what they take. There was an article in the paper recently of an adjoining jurisdiction where the time frames were much longer, but that's just one jurisdiction. One of the other measures that we use is what kind of feedback we get from the folks who are actually trying to get their projects through. And generally, if we're in that 4-week period for a project of any significant size, generally that feels fairly comfortable. I should put a caveat on that. No one would object to it being quicker, none of the applicants, and I understand that and appreciate it. But generally, we see that people are much more comfortable with 4 weeks than longer periods.
And then I wanted to agree that the presentation was nice in terms of understanding the numbers, and in particular the ratchet down effect with Tabor is complicated, and I liked that graph as a way to understand it. With Tabor, I understand there's some discussion about how the rebates will happen and so I guess I'm curious, what are the different options for how the Tabor rebate could happen? And
okay, thank you. Let's see. For the moment, we've drafted the ordinance, which is in the book that you have, whereby the refund will be made via property taxes. Tabor doesn't have any specific requirement for who, what, how, or why necessarily. Well, I suppose the why is there, beg your pardon. The refund should be made. So there's no playbook or description there. It's somewhat any reasonable fashion possible. And as you know, in the past, the city has made its refund via stormwater management utility, but the refund is so large that it can't be accomplished that way. So the current proposal in the ordinance as is, and frankly a very common way for making a reduction is via the property tax. So Mayor Murphy talked a little bit about the property tax mill levy, and it would be reduced by about half or thereabouts. What we'll need to do is draft an ordinance that says the mill levy will be reduced such that $5,200,000 can be refunded. And then, once the final assessment is received by the assessor's office, the city manager will have the authority to sort of fill in the correct box on the form that gets filed with the Jefferson County Assessor's Office. That will make a quick calculation to the revised or temporarily reduced mill levy, and why that will be the mill levy that will be paid by property owners throughout the city of Lakewood. Other communities have done things differently. They've written checks to citizens. We think this amounts to, for a typical resident, about $60, and the cost to administer that would be significant, to say the least, whereas we don't have any huge cost to make that refund via the property tax. Naturally, you might say, well, gosh, that property, or excuse me, that revenue surplus was paid by visitors that stayed in hotels in Lakewood, visitors who've done shopping at our various retail outlets, or people who don't own properties. And so that's just what we're stuck with. Tabor is imperfect in that regard, and this is something that's been done so commonly that the Division of Local Government that devises the form for the property tax assessors across the state already has all of that there. So that's the current plan, and I recommend that. I think that's the most efficient and expedient way to get that done.
Councillor Quinn?
Thank you, Mayor Murphy. First, Larry, I have to say this is as much fun the 8th time as it was the first. It's a show, and it's a great show. And I'm not a big numbers guy, and you do such a great job of presenting this. I know I've told you this before, but it's really a well-presented budget. The document is beautifully done. The presentations are always very well done, very easy, user-friendly for anybody to be able to grasp what's going on. And so thank you again for doing such a great job for these last 8 years. It's fantastic. So I will be tuning in next year.
Perfect.
I'll pop some popcorn and, put my feet up. And
as I say, Counselor, I do have the 30-plus folks behind me that possible, but we'll hold you to it.
Thank you. And Jay, it's great to see what we're doing with the sidewalks on Sheridan. And I actually don't have a question. It's more of a comment. I was remembering back to Planning Commission days back in 2000 when we looked at the Sheridan Boulevard strategic plan and the discussion of the very real need for sidewalks on Sheridan. And I'm glad to see this taking form in action now. And actually see these being built. And so I think it was a really good decision of this council to put more money towards sidewalks last year. Very serious, dire need, public safety, transportation issue there. So thank you for moving forward with this project. It's good to see it moving.
Certainly, if I could do just a follow-up comment. Sure. This community does a lot of plans, and we really try to implement them. And you mentioned the strategic plan, I think you said in 2000. I believe this is the 6th project for constructing sidewalks along Sheridan since 2000. Right. There had been a couple before that, but we try to follow through on those plans. We can never do everything that's in every plan in a reasonable amount of time, but we do keep them in mind for quite a while. So,
yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and we didn't expect at that time that everything would get done all at once. So it's good to see another step forward on that. Thank you. I actually had a couple of questions for Ms. Newland. And this is more of a question kind of looking out to the future, but I noticed the comment, and this is on page 440, about the increasing operation and maintenance costs, and that it's expected that open space funds will ultimately be available only for operation and maintenance, that this could be an issue, could negatively influence future funding requests from Jefferson County Open Space. So it looks like maybe this is an issue that's coming for us down the road as these costs continue to increase. I'm just wondering if there's any way to avoid that potential crisis down the road.
Well, there's several things to say about that. One is that open space revenues have increased quite significantly this last year and second half of 2014. So we're hopeful, and it all depends on the economy, of course, but we're hopeful that that may continue, so that could change that outlook. The other thing is that we're looking at mostly just maintenance projects for our open space, and I think we'll be able to, I'm sorry, I'm not sure that I exactly understand what your question is, but
I'm more concerned looking out into the future in terms of negatively influencing our future funding requests from Jefferson County Open Space for master plan.
So they've run out, or they're very close to running out of their bond money for grants. However, they're looking at strategies to increase that funding again for community grants. So they don't have a exact idea of what they're going to do, but I'm pretty confident that they'll come up with a good plan to be able to continue to fund community projects.
Okay.
Yeah. Good. I don't know exactly what it will be, but they're working on it.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and people sometimes think, well, gosh, you get a park, you just leave it you don't do anything to it, it just sits there.
Yeah.
But that's, acquiring the land is really only just the beginning of
Yes,
the process.
absolutely.
So,
Yes.
and just one other question, and that's Bear Creek Lake Park. Do we anticipate any adjustments as a result of the damage that occurred from the flooding this past spring and summer?
Yes, we're looking at an additional $50,000 in from general fund to help support renovations to the creek. Bear Creek again experienced some damage, although we stabilized it really well with the renovation. There's some damage again, not quite what it was last time, but we're looking at using the money for that, and we also have some pier and docks that need to be replaced as well. So those are the major places. We're going to be seeing some tree damage, of course, and we just don't have a good sense for what that looks like quite yet, and whether or not we'll actually replace all those trees. So it'll take a few years for us to assess that.
Okay, yeah, I've been out there a couple times. I was out there a lot while the flooding was going on, and then a couple of times since then. And I have to say, it's a lot of it back up and running, and as they used to say, ship shape in Bristol fashion. I mean, it looks great.
It's kind of amazing that even with the storm damage, the park has been busier this year. We keep increasing numbers.
Yes. Truly a victim of its own success to some extent. Yes. Thank you, Kim.
Thank you. One last, Councillor Johnson.
Thank you. Actually, Tom, you took my question. I was curious about the cost of Bear Creek as well. However, I would really like to thank Jay. You put a lot of time into the permitting process and streamlining that, upgrading the way it's done. I've heard so many comments about frustrations with that. Thank you. And Kathy, I'm not sure if you're the one responsible for the self-funded insurance or Jeff, but actually it's a great idea, and I'm glad to see us go in that direction. And Chief Paletta, I'm very happy to see us get some more police on the streets. That's also an issue I've heard a great deal of, particularly along the 13th Avenue corridor. Thank you. I'm glad to see that happen.
Cindy?
So I just have comments that I'd like to make since it's my last city, as Larry Dorr mentioned, my last budget study session for the city of Lakewood. And over the years, first of all, thank you, Larry, for putting in language we can all understand, and your examples that you give are always very easy, and the diagrams you do, because I'm a visual learner as well, is very, very helpful. Really do appreciate that. I don't think I'll be popping popcorn and watching this time next year, just so you know, but I know that the city is in good hands with the leadership we have here in the city staff. Jay, your comments about the multi-department team that you've been put together to look over people's projects as they bring them in, especially the bigger projects, to ensure that they're getting done right, but also the ones that are coming in from first-time commercial buyers that are trying to figure out how to retrofit something into, used to be a garage, now into a restaurant, for example. Putting that together and having the foresight to do that is awesome, and I appreciate the changes that have occurred over the years, because as we know, that was one of the topics I brought up early on in my rookie year as a city council person, and I do appreciate the changes that have continued to come. And this is a city that does that. They continually look for ways to improve, to make it better, and at the same time being fiscally prudent about the taxpayer dollars while trying to understand what the needs are and the services are that our citizenry requires. And our citizenry continues to change. We're becoming more diverse, and so that's an ever-changing ball that you've got to chase. And how do you do that? So the creativity on the team that's led by our city manager, Kathy Hodson, has been wonderful to be a part of over these last years. I'm sorry I haven't had a chance to have more time with Jeff Dolan and Mike Prey. Travis, we've had a few years together, and I appreciate the changes you've made in the planning department as well. And Chief, you've never come to us unless you've had a need for something. And I also appreciate that. You don't make something up to say we need it because we don't necessarily need it. When you come to us, I know we need it. That you've taken the time to look over what your department needs, what the city needs from a service capacity, and the community policing that goes on in our city is absolutely one of the best in the state, in my opinion, probably in the country. And I hear that from a lot of the citizens I'm involved with over the last 8 years. National Night Out, we always get great attendance, and our officers are always having a great time, and they're reacting very well. And that's just one very small example of what our police department does. Looking forward to the next COPS Council and Community meeting, by the way, because we are going to be talking about what all the police department does that not everybody is aware of in our city. So I look forward to that. And Kit, thank you for always listening to the citizens as well and community resources. Today I drove by Mount Air Park, and sure enough, there were people under that shelter, and there was 2 kids playing basketball in the sport court, which didn't happen before when that was down in the southeast corner of the park. The changes I've seen within the city have just been phenomenal. I appreciate it. I know that it's going to continue. The staff that's there, and of course, how could I forget our city clerk, Margie, who keeps us all in line and makes sure that things are running smoothly. I hear a lot of comments, as positive comments as well, about our city clerk's office and how well run that is. Not much else to say other than thank you very much for the opportunity to have served.
Thank you, Cindy. Thanks for your wonderful comments about our staff. Shakti?
I don't know if this is quite a question or a comment, but I know that there's some looking for whether there's an appropriate site for a mulch facility, and I don't know if that's something that should be reflected in the budget or not.
I think that's a perfect segue to Ms. Hodson. Great question. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Can I make just a few comments first?
Yep.
And then I'll address that. Thank you. First of all, I just have to say I appreciate so much the talent of these department heads and the work that they do. And to a person, they are all very inspiring and very smart and do a very good job with this budget. So I'd like to personally thank the department heads for their work. And second of all, if you're interested in better understanding or getting a comprehensive look of our compensation program, I had to write that down so I said that right, a comprehensive look at our compensation program, including our police department, we're happy to review that for you so you can understand. It's a really good system, and it's a fair system. We're happy to show that to you if that's something you want to look at, including both the police department and the entire organization. That's something I'd offer to you. Finally, due to the fact that we're in a really favorable situation again with our fund reserves, I would like to propose that we address 3 significant areas that are currently, one is a new initiative that Councilor Shakti just brought up that's completely unfunded, and 2 are programs that are, I would say, underfunded today and could use an infusion of some additional dollars. So here's what I would like to propose. The 2 programs that are underfunded that would, if we infused some money from our reserves into them, would really have a strong impact, similar to the $2 million we're doing right now with the sidewalk program. One program is the playground program. If we took about $1 million from our reserves and put that into our playground program, we could add approximately 3 new playgrounds to our park system. And as you know, we have about 25% of our land mass in the city of Lakewood is parkland or open space, and that includes a whole lot of playgrounds, and it's hard to keep up with the replacement of those playgrounds. So I see that as a real need, and this would be a one-time effort to infuse into the playground program. The second one would be our median improvement program. We hear a lot about the need to improve our medians. When we have medians out there that are that have been improved, we get lots of compliments about those. And I've heard from you over the years and from our citizens that would be another program that if we put some money into those, I'm proposing about $800,000 into that program, that would go a long way as well. Currently, we use operating dollars, and we use just kind of whatever we can to scrape dollars to put toward our median program. So if we could, again, with a one-time infusion of $800,000, we'd really see some good impact in our medians. And finally, to Councillor Shakti's point, we're getting close to coming to you with a recommendation for a slash facility. We've talked about this as a community. You've talked about it as a council for a couple of years now, since we lost the regional facility housed in Jefferson County. I would like to propose that we set some money aside so that we can start with the funding of that. We don't have a site yet, but we have an internal team that's working on that. We'll come to you when we have a recommendation. I'd like to provide some funding for that. You know what, and this might be a program that we do just in the city as opposed to a broader program, so that we don't have the risk of it being pulled again. So I would like to recommend another $800,000 to be put toward a slash facility, just to be held in reserve for that. And again, when we come with a site and we have a definitive program, we would come back to you with that. So playground program, median improvement program, and a slash facility program. This is our study session. I'm asking you to consider that. We have until, obviously, second reading until there's an action. That would be a total transfer from the reserves of $2.6 million, one-time expenditures. Councillor Shakti and I talked earlier about maybe putting some more money into the sidewalk program, but I think Mayor Murphy, you said it well, that now that we have some additional dollars, we need the time now to do that work, the design and all that work. So I'm recommending maybe a different tact for this year. So think about it. You have some time. If I would like to direct staff to do the analysis after this, and we'd come back with more specific recommendations with those dollars.
That's great, Kathy, and it's another example of something we keep talking about, and that's reinvesting some of these surpluses back into our community. I want to reemphasize the point you just made. It wouldn't be us sitting up here choosing the playground or median projects. The idea would be to have staff do the analysis and come back to City Council with recommendation based upon need and cost and
frankly, conditions.
condition.
So think about playgrounds. We would look at who has the most need and where do we need to do that replacement. And we're seeing a real change in our demographics, and where are those kiddos, and where can we best meet those needs?
Yep,
So.
exactly. And then final thing I feel compelled to say is when we're talking about a slash pile, you said it would be, in the city, so we're not subject to the whims of another jurisdiction. That doesn't mean it's going to be next to somebody's neighborhood, right? So,
yes, thank you for that. They tend to be a little noisy.
Yeah.
They tend to have a scent, a smell,
Right.
and sometimes not especially attractive. So we're real careful. We'd be real careful with the selection of that site.
just wanted to get that out there and make that perfectly clear. Councillor Paul, Councillor Coop, and then Councillor Quinn.
Thank you. Thank you. I think those are wonderful ideas, all three of them. And I look forward to hearing more about it as we get closer to approval. Thank you.
Scott?
A question about the median suggestion. Neighborhoods in the past have used their neighborhood participation grants to do medians, and I'm almost all along the east side of the Colfax on the east side of town. Is this money, I was never aware that there was another just program for medians, or you're talking about this money going into the neighborhood participation program? So,
no, thank you. No, I'm speaking of setting money aside strictly for medians, for the median program. So yes, the neighborhood participation program can also contribute to that. Medians can be very expensive depending on what needs to be done, what the improvements need. So this would be a set aside separate program dedicated just to medians.
So this is a new
funding source.
Little chunk of change.
That's right. A little chunk of change, right.
Yeah, so often with the neighborhood participation programs, they get $15,000 here, and I think the maximum is $50,000. So, and we're talking about $800,000 to look citywide.
That's right.
At some real needs. Tom.
Yes, I just wanted to say thank you, Kathy, regarding the slash issue. That's something we've had a number of discussions about over the last a couple of years since, just by way of background to kind of remind everybody, originally the Rooney Road Recycling Center was the site where people could drop off their leaves, their tree limbs, and it was thousands of tons of material every year that we were keeping out of the landfill. And Jefferson County Open Space decided that it was not an appropriate use of their land anymore for us to use that site adjacent to the Rooney Road facility. And so there has been no permanent repository for the last 2 years. I shouldn't say repository, I should say drop-off site. It was very popular. People really don't want to just have their organic material, their leaves, their tree limbs, their yard trimmings go into a landfill. It really doesn't make any sense. And we've received many inquiries over the last 2 years about what do we do with our leaves now? It's fall. And what do we do with our tree limbs when it's time to clean up our yard in the spring? So thank you for addressing this.
Thank you. Councilor Shakti.
I just have a general comment. Is it the right time for that?
Yep.
So I think with nearly 1,000 employees in the city, the truth is that to understand really everything that the city does, no one person can do that. It's a group effort, and the more time I spend here, the better my understanding. But I find this budgeting process one of the steps that really gives a richer understanding of all of the different things that are happening in the city, and also the intelligence and the cooperation, and so I enjoy it.
Thank you. All right. Well, thanks very much. We're going to move right into the next agenda item, which is the LRA presentation of the LRA budget. As our Economic Development Director and Deputy City Manager is moving to the microphone, I'd like to, and as a few people are getting up to leave, I noticed that there are, I think, 5 of the 10 declared new candidates for City Council are in the chambers tonight. And to you 5, I thank you very much for being here to
next to the 100%.
To learn about this most important aspect of our city, which is the budgeting process. So thank you very much for being here, 5 of you.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. Nanette Nealon, Deputy City Manager. And as I'm presenting today, you're going to see almost a redundancy from 2014 budget study session, because for the Lakewood Reinvestment Authority, we're in a maintenance mode, and that's soon to change. And I anticipate it could be happening the 3rd quarter or 4th quarter of this year. So I want to go over some of the basics for the broader community to understand about the Lakewood Reinvestment Authority. The voters approved the formation of the LRA in 1997, and it also designated the mayor and council serve as the board of the Lakewood Reinvestment Authority. And what you're going to see is so far you've designated 3 areas, and you have 3 reinvestment projects. And as I'm going over here, the 3 areas include the West Alameda Corridor, and it was amended to include the Belmar area. The second one was the Colfax-Wadsworth Corridor, and then the 3rd one is the West Colfax Corridor. Those corridors, the West Alameda was formed in 1998. The Colfax-Wadsworth Reinvestment District was formed in 1999. The Belmar, or Phase 2, was designated in 2000, and then the entire West Colfax Corridor in 2005. And what's important about that is that it included what we call the tax increment financing clock went off. And that allowed 25 years of collection of revenues from property tax increment. And so some of these programs are getting to their midlife cycle on things. As we have projects, we had the Belmar project came out of the West Alameda Belmar area. And then out of the Colfax-Wadsworth reinvestment area, we had the Creekside project come out of that. And then out of the West Colfax area, the project that got designated is the station betterments. The West Alameda, the first phase, has no specific project at this time. And the mission of a reinvestment authority our job is to encourage the private reinvestment within the targeted areas of Lakewood that were designated as in that map. The activities that happen is we look at condition surveys to look at how the areas are progressing or whether they qualify to come into and form a reinvestment plan. We designate the areas. And more now, we're looking at what project approvals need to happen or redevelopment tools that we can use for these specific areas, specifically for the removal of blight, and provide the oversight. How do we do that? We have complete and independent books and records by the areas, and that's presented in your budget document, which contains operating funds specific for that project area. In addition, we have an agreement between the LRA and the city, such that we have several staff that assist in some project coordination. And amongst that is we have 1.13 FTEs. That includes accounting and economic specialists. The revenues, besides getting the property tax increment, we also get sales tax increment on the Colfax-Wadsworth area, and we also serve as the collecting entity for public improvement fee in that area, and that's unique. So to parallel what Larry talked about in the conversation of which side of the equation we look at revenue, in the revenue we're about at an $8 million level, and 77% of that comes from the property tax increment from all the three areas. Specific to Colfax and Wadsworth, we collect a sales tax increment, and then and also for the West Colfax area, and then for the Colfax-Wadsworth, we are a pass-through entity for the public improvement fee. If you look at the other side of the equation, how does the money get spent or exit those funds? Is most of them are on redevelopment cost reimbursements. We have agreements in several of the areas. Low risk, we pay the developer. The developer handles the upfront cost for projects. The exception is that we took out on the West Colfax the Station Betterments program. We took out we worked and got some funding from First Bank for that. 1% of our expenditures are for our personnel costs, and then the remaining costs are for the services and supplies. And what we include in that category is the principal and interest payments for the betterment loan. We fund a component to the Alameda and West Colfax Business Improvement Districts. We pay all our legal and our consultant fees out of there. And then specific on the West Colfax, there is a payment to West Metro to offset some of their losses, their perceived losses from the property tax increment. What I think is an important concept that we try to continue to hit home is every time we form the area, the property tax that was collected in those areas goes back to the appropriate entities, the school district and the county. It's only the new increment, the new assessed value above and beyond that base value that is collected and going into this fund. And that's what we call the increment. And that's based on the improvements that are done through the various projects. As I said, we have revenues exceeding around $8.8 million. And what you'll see over the 3 years that are presented here, there's not much that has changed. It's from whether the property tax increment has increased or whether some sales tax increment, but we've run anywhere between $8.5 million and $8.8 million. Specific to this year, we're looking at about $8.5 million in revenue. The expenditures that go out are about this year are $8.2 million. It's within $200,000 over last year. So that leaves a remaining balance between all the four funds of about $364,000 that are being deposited into the fund balances. What you see is a fund balance of about $3.5 million, of which a little over $3 million is in the West Alameda corridor, around 200,000 is in the West Colfax corridor. So the main corridor that has an opportunity for projects for public improvements will be the West Alameda corridor coming up. And looking forward, We're going to propose some strategic opportunities, particularly in the West Alameda corridor, for you to consider. We anticipate that could be before the end of the year. And the big thing that is, you've heard discussions with CML, is that the new legislation that was passed, House B 1348, still has some clarity, and it will be our job for you as staff to make sure we're in compliance with all the legislation that passed, which has a lot of clarity yet to seek, and I think that that message was loud and clear from Kevin Bomber before. So in conclusion, the budget is generally consistent from the past couple of years.
Thanks, Nanette.
Okay.
I don't see any questions. As you alluded to, we'll have some follow-up in a little bit later on this evening in an executive session, but we'll have some follow-up later on about some potential reinvestment opportunities with those fund surpluses. And I think I'll just say generally what you see, the difference between Alameda and Colfax in those fund surpluses is the difference in assessed property values, or the change in assessed property values on Alameda versus Colfax. Very, very significant difference, and we'll learn more about that as the weeks go by. All right, thank you. So I do want to thank everybody. I think Councilor Barraway did an outstanding job of thanking staff, all of staff, and particularly management team that is here tonight for all the work you do all year long on not just preparing the budget, but managing the finances of this wonderful organization. You know, we ran off 10 straight years of operating fund balances, and that's due to your perseverance and your management skills. So it's just an incredible that isn't a good enough word. It's just a remarkable performance year after year after year through the greatest recession we've seen in our lifetime. All this without layoffs, without furloughs, and by the way, lowering taxes in the meantime as we remove the sales tax from groceries in this town, as Mr. Dora referred to. So really, as I depart after 16 years of budget study sessions, and I will not be toasting popcorn and watching the next one. I can assure you of that. With any luck, where I am, there won't be any television or internet, but that's a joke. But anyway, thank you all sincerely very, very much. So we're going to move on. We've got an executive session to follow. With council's permission, I want to dispense with reports tonight. I don't know if there's anything earth-shaking, and we're a little bit behind schedule here. It's 8:46 as we adjourn the study session of City Council and the LRA. And I would ask that we gather for the executive session upstairs in the city manager's conference room within a maximum of like 8 minutes. So, you know, a nature break, and then let's try to move on. We are adjourned. Thank you.